right. Torn. We have no minutes. Legislative item tonight. 2022. For consideration of an applicant-driven amendment to amend the Ogden Valley Signs to allow a neighborhood identifications. That hadn't asked Mr. Grover to explain.
Are we on the first item?
We are.
Perfect. So this is a legislative item, and as you review this, you are going to be making a recommendation to the county commission. And you'll be listening to public comment. You'll need to open and close the public hearing and take comment from the public on this. And this evening, Mr. Burton is going to be presenting this item.
Good evening, commissioners. As was stated, this is a legislative item. It is a public hearing to consider an applicant-driven text amendment to amend the Ogden Valley Signs ordinance to allow neighborhood identification sign to be placed on a retaining wall. I'm just briefly, this is a very simple text amendment proposal, so it should be fairly quick to go through. But I believe the applicant is here as well. In November of last year, the applicant is Wolf Creek, Utah. The representative is listed as Taylor Lewis. The applicant filed an application to amend the Ogden Valley Signs ordinance. The intention to allow a subdivision identification sign on a retaining wall. Currently, our signs ordinance doesn't allow a sign to be placed on a retaining wall. I'm going to show you just to display what the applicant proposed. Let me just go here real quick. Right here, just a couple of lines. I'll just read it for you. They proposed new section D under subsection 2 of residential uses. Subdivision entry sign may also be placed on a retaining wall. The signage in this case is not to exceed a height of 4.5 feet nor a width of 40 feet. That's what they're asking to have amended. As staff, we reviewed this and we felt that we could add some language and do a few things to the ordinance that would still meet the intent of what the applicant is trying to do here. So I'm going to display on my screen what that is. It's just a simple one page, a couple of lines. As I go through these, let me know if you have any questions. And I should ask Chair, since it's so few lines, should I just read it? Okay, sounds good. Here's what we've proposed as staff. In our current signs ordinance, we reference subdivision entry signs in 2 locations, and we'd like to eliminate that redundancy if we can. So the red indicates language that is being stricken and the blue indicates new language. So I'll just read that. Starting on line 14 through 16. It used to say, under subsection C, subdivision entry signs, monument sign. Each subdivision may be allowed 1 monument sign, not to exceed 6 feet in height and 10 feet in width. The sign may be placed on a landscape mounted berm up to 2 feet from grade. And then we're going to go down to lines 22 through 27, where we again reference subdivision entry sign, kind of a redundancy. Subdivision entry signs. An approved recorded subdivision may locate 1 sign at each entrance. The sign shall be a ground or monument sign and shall meet all specifications / requirements for monument signs in section 110-2-5, which we just read. The dimensions of the sign shall be no greater than allowed in the AB3 zone. The Planning Commission shall approve location and design style. A double entry sign may be approved by the Planning Commission where there is a divided center island entry street. So we're proposing to get rid of that and to just make some clarifying language. Also, this term double, how did we called it a double entry sign. That didn't initially make sense to us when we were just doing a read over a couple of weeks ago as we were preparing for this meeting. We'd like to better define what a double entry sign is, or talk about it in a way that makes more sense. So here's what we as staff are proposing that we feel meets the intent of what the applicant is asking for. And that starts on 27 through 32. Neighborhood entry signs. Each neighborhood or development may be allowed one ground sign, or if affixed to a retaining wall sign, not to exceed, or if affixed to a retaining wall sign, not to exceed 6 feet in height and 40 feet in width. This sign may be placed on a landscaped mounted berm up to 2 feet from grade in neighborhoods where a divided center island has been approved. In a public or private street, the planning commission may approve 2 entry signs with one sign on either side of the street. We bumped up the 4.5 that the applicant was asking for, the height, to 6. We just feel that's a better number to regulate, and 4.5 just seemed like an odd number. So we went with 6, 40 feet in width. Just to give you an idea, the applicant submitted this drawing that's in your staff report that shows this monument sign would be 30 feet wide on a wall. At least the portion of the wall that's facing the camera is about 145 feet wide, just to give you some context about what 30 to 40 feet could look like in width. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
So to be clear, what we're talking about amending is the overall amendment, not just this particular development. So this would affect all developments, not just this one, right?
That's right. The applicant has applied to amend the Ogden Valley Sign Code, which applies to the whole Ogden Valley.
Can you share with us any reasons why we were not allowed to put signage on retaining walls previously?
My understanding is there wasn't any specific reason we didn't have it in the ordinance. We weren't against having them. I think it's just kind of a newer thing that we're seeing developers do, at least in the valley, is wanting to put signs on retaining walls. This particular developer has done it on a few different proposals, a few different planned residential unit developments where it could be like in a PRUD, you may get an exception to the sign ordinance to be able to do something like this. Where Osprey Ranch isn't a PRUD, they had to come in and amend the code. Long way to answer your question. I just don't think we ever thought about it, and it's just never been an option in the ordinance.
How does a subdivision entry sign differ from what now will be allowed?
We're going to call it a neighborhood entry sign.
Neighborhood entry sign. So in paragraph 2, we limit it to 6 square feet. And then if it's multifamily, it's 20 square feet. But when it comes under paragraph 3, it's 240 square feet. Is that what you intend? And how does the 240 fit with the 20?
I apologize, Commissioner Burton, I'm not following your question. Multifamily.
So the blue writing, the new text says we can have a not to exceed 6 feet in height times 40 feet in width. So 6 times 4, 24, 240 square feet. So
what you had redlined out in 2C was 60 square feet.
Yeah, so this bumps it up significantly. It changes. Previously, you could do a monument sign. Previously, a developer could propose a monument sign that was 60 square feet. And this proposal would increase that allowance to go up to 240 square feet.
okay.
So why is that good? Why is that good for the community?
Some of the reasons that we were looking at this is we're looking at the scale. And when you're looking at monument signs, they're much smaller. And so they stay in scale with this. But when you start dealing with retaining walls, you're dealing with a much larger area. And so when we look at the scale of this, it stays in scale with that. And so when we looked at their proposal, we felt that it was reasonable because retaining walls, the scale is much bigger, whereas on a monument sign, it's much smaller. So that's why we looked at it that way.
Didn't you line out the monument sign as the 60, so 2C no longer exists as an option or as a,
No, so monument sign could still exist. It's just that we're no longer calling subdivision entry signs monument signs. We're creating its own classification.
but without stating a size restriction for a mine. Am I missing something? Is the monument sign no longer limited to 60 square feet, or is it still limited to 60 square feet? If they chose a monument sign versus a retaining wall sign.
Intent was that the monument sign would still be required to stay at the same size that it is right now. It would just be for retaining wall signs. So if we need to change the language, we can.
It does maybe allowed one ground sign. Or if affixed to, so a ground sign would count as a monument sign. And their monument sign could go up to 40 feet in width.
A monument sign could go up to 40 feet if it was not attached to a retaining wall.
That's right.
So they would just construct a pure sign. A very large sign that's not part of a retaining wall. They
On
could.
on a monument, they could.
We may want to change that because I don't think that was the intent. The monument sign wasn't supposed to be changed in size. It was just the retaining wall size.
I don't understand the difference between a wall sign, a monument sign, and a neighborhood entry sign.
A neighborhood entry sign or subdivision monument sign, they're pretty much the same thing because they're the entry into the subdivision. So we can change that name to be
what's-
synonymous.
Yeah, what's the difference between a ground sign and a wall sign?
A wall sign is affixed. Typically, a wall sign is affixed to a wall. And a
To a
ground
building.
sign is its own structure.
So
Like
the
a
ground and the
sign.
monument are the same thing?
A ground sign is a monument sign.
And a wall sign is affixed to a structure or a building.
That's right.
So maybe it would be helpful to clarify the definitions here of what we're talking about.
We can do that.
Is there-
And the size.
Is there a way to kind of eliminate this process as a whole and just say, can have it be reviewed at the development agreement level? You have to have.
I would do it at this level. Because we may have other areas where it may be appropriate as we looked at it. It makes sense to have it in other areas than just limiting it to a development agreement for this specific area.
There are, I feel like I've seen maybe in other locations, or maybe even in the Ogden Valley monument signs that are fairly wide. But I guess they're not technically 40 feet in width. And so maybe if maybe I come back with an example of something that looks like a monument sign that's 40 feet in width to give you some context with a retaining wall sign.
That might be a good idea.
So I'm trying to picture a hypothetical here in paragraph 2, single family. This is a house. Can have a sign identifying the name of the owner. But it has to be on a wall. It can't be on the ground, or which would be a post. This is a single house. May have a sign, but only on the wall of the house.
Yeah.
But then I've just been through a inspection situation where I was told, no, wall of the house is not good enough. It's got to be visible from the street. You got to put a post up on the street
That's
with the address on it.
Yeah, I think that's different than a wall sign. That's a building inspection sign, right? Where they want to see your address.
No, that's if you're going to get occupancy, you have to have this sign up on the street.
Are you talking about an address? Because
Talking
that's
address,
separate.
Well,
from
an
this.
address with, you know,
An address is excluded from this.
you put your name on the walls. If you put your name on the post with the address up on the street, it's a monument sign and it's not allowed. I just wondered about
yeah,
over regulation. Why, you know, are any of these numbers tied to an objective standard? Or are they all subjective?
We've never got into enforcing when you put the name associated with the address, but if you were starting to put actual signage out there for like a home business that you have going on with that, then that's when we're gonna start enforcing that.
Okay, so that could be in a commercial use as part of the code.
That would be on like a home occupation with the residential use, because that's the only type of business that we would allow for residential use. Is a home occupation, and we wouldn't allow signage.
What about, there are some single home, I guess, ranch kind of places that have, you know, like a big beam and it says like the Circle K Ranch or the, whatever it might be. And it's only one home, but that's not affixed to their wall. Is that not a monument?
It's an arch sign.
That's an arch. That's another type of sign?
Yeah.
Okay, and if a home has 10 acres and they want to put a big, beautiful boulder right before their driveway and they say it's Casa, that's not allowed because that's not affixed to my home. Is that
Not-
correct? I
not
just want to make
necess-
sure I understand.
Not necessarily the, and I feel like we're getting a little bit off topic, but because we're not proposing to change single family or multifamily at all. But it does say under single family line 10, one wall sign identifying the name of the owner or property not to exceed 6 feet is permitted. Doesn't
Steve-
necessarily say where that wall sign needs to be placed, but
Steve, I don't know that I think if I can come back as to why you're saying, feel like we're getting off topic. I don't know. I think you're right. We are in this particular instance, but I think what the planning commission's alluding to is that the sign code as a whole has concerns. And so I don't know what the right answer is here, but it sounds like there's some questions that need to be addressed before we can say yes, or we need to make some changes here right now and move forward on it. So I don't think it's off topic, but I think we might want to either propose some changes if anybody has any, or maybe we need to table.
I also had one question about something that was crossed out in red. In section 110(2-9, the part that says that, where is it? The planning commission shall approve location and design style. That's been struck out and I don't see it replaced. Is that just, once we approve this, people can go all the way up to that size, font, caricature, and we have no aesthetic?
it still says that if you read the bottom of the blue, the planning commission may approve 2 entry signs with 1 sign on either side of the street.
Okay, it's just the language is different. Location and design style in here, it says may approve 2 entry signs. I don't know if that makes a difference, but it seems to me it changes what our
Yeah, so they're kind of 2 separate things. Do we have any proposals for what we should say, or do we want to table this?
I just wonder, so you want to change it to 40 feet in width? And we have to, the standard we have to use before we can do anything really is health, safety and welfare of the public. So is 41 feet wide unsafe?
I wouldn't say that it's health, safety, and welfare of the public when you're talking about signs necessarily. But so my staff report says that someone's proposing a sign, a retaining wall sign or a monument sign that's 40 feet in width and 6 feet in height. I feel that that's not contrary to the general plan. And I feel that that's enough of a reason to forward a positive recommendation to the county commission.
I guess I'm just concerned about over regulating and wondering why we care if it's 6 square feet or 7 square feet or whatever, or what it looks like, because that's a subjective decision. It's not related to health, safety or welfare unless it obstructs traffic or something. So why are we
I think,
regulating private property owners and what they want to put on their property?
I think Commissioner Barber brought up a good point, though. I mean, there is a limit, right? There should be a limit to the size of a sign that somebody can build.
Why?
That's what the current ordinance states. And so
I understand.
That's
Because
why
it
we
could
have the-
negatively impact.
it won't allow us to do it.
So do we have any proposed changes or should we? Do we have to have the public hearing? We do, don't we?
Yes,
Do we want a motion to open? Do I have to motion or can I just open it?
you need to make a motion to open the public and then
Move to
close
open
it.
the public hearing.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. So we'll now open for public comment. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record prior to making your comments. Person speaking for a committee or board will be given 5 minutes. All other individuals will be entitled to 2 minutes prior to speaking. Anyone who needs more time, please present evidence and ask. Let's go ahead and open it up. We got a couple hands online. If we want to start there, we can. How about Ron Gleason?
Good evening, this is Ron Gleason. Is the audio working well?
Yes.
Thank you. Personally, I have no problem with signs on retaining walls. But the one thing I would like for the commission to consider has to do with lighting on these signs. Staff report said that the lighting would stay the same. For retaining wall based signs, I'd like to see it added that no lighting is allowed. If we look at the dimensions being recommended by staff, 6 feet high, 40 feet wide equals 240 square feet. The sign ordinance allows 75 lumens per square foot, which computes to 18,000 lumens, which when you compute this out is about 12 100-watt bulbs. That is a fairly bright light, and the fact that there is no consideration being made for the materials of the retaining wall, whether they be natural, whether it be glossy, and so on, I think it would be best to say for any sign on a retaining wall that lighting is not allowed. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. All right. Jan Fulmer.
Okay, can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, no, because there was a lot of static coming over. I don't know if it was just my laptop, but it was pretty hard to hear what people were saying. Basically, I agree very much with what Ron Gleason has stated, especially about the lighting, but also we've been trying to standardize different types of signs in Ogden Valley, directional signs like this way to go to a restaurant, this way to go to the post office or whatever. But the one thing that is really not welcome is electronic signs. So hopefully they can put something up on a retaining wall that's not too large and it's not electronic or flashing.
Thank you. All right. Please.
Hello, Eric Householder with the Householder Group representing the applicant. Our initial, I guess, proposal to change the text, because right now we cannot put a sign on a retaining wall. There is no development agreement with this project. It's traditional subdivision. And we sized it based on how far this was off the road. And I think you see it in here that it's over 200 feet from the road. So that's kind of how we came up with our sizing for lettering and whatnot. And some of these monument signs that you guys are talking, I mean, they can be much closer to the road. So that's how we kind of scaled that. In terms of lighting, you know, obviously we meet the code. I think we'd like to have the ability to do some sort of lighting, some backlit type stuff that meets the dark sky ordinance. Anyway, that's the intent of our application. You guys are kind of talking about some other things, but I just want to make it clear on what Any questions from you?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments from the public? Please.
Hi, Steve Emery. I'm from over in Eden, 2725 North, 3990 East. It just appears that we're kind of in the interest of putting on the shelf the current kind of conservative signage approach that we've got. And we're talking about these expanded signs just because the applicant has got a request for a sign that ends up being fairly huge. I think if we go back with probably the original spirit and intent, and that was to keep the signage in the valley fairly conservative. And if you remember in the past, when we've had real estate signs, all that sort of stuff, especially like around over there at the Maverick Station and across from the grocery store, the market. All those restrictions held it kind of tight. We were doing pretty good on signage, it seemed to me, in the valley. I've lived there for 25 years, retired Air Force. And it just seems like it's getting away from us. If you go and you look over there now, it seems like we got little signs popping up everywhere with arrows going everywhere, trying to help people out. Great idea. But I think we've overdone it. Okay. That even in the military and housing projects, and I used to own housing projects as a base commander, we try to keep that signage down, minimum required, or let people know what's going on. But if we start building these great big signs like we're talking about, and now all of a sudden, hey, why should we have any restrictions? We're going to have those things popping up like billboards all over it, every development we've got in the valley. So I think just because an applicant comes in and they've got a sign that's this big, we shouldn't adjust our standards to that sign just because that's our latest person that's come to the trough. We ought to be taking a good look at what really do we want to hold our signage standards to, so that we don't end up with a valley full of billboards. And I think originally you were on the right track. And in the enforcement business, as you've done for a number of years, the people that have popped up signs, there's made signs, put them on locations, and then you've taken them to task because they're not the proper sign, they're not in the proper place. I think your heart's in the right place. I think your head's in the right place, and that's where you got to go.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, if there's no other public comment, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Well, we've heard some good comments. I have a question for the planning commission and maybe even planning. Looking at this, that seems like we do have some we have some good regulations that seem to work good for a while. Maybe we're missing a hole that is the retaining wall, right? Some of these, we got retaining walls like this where I think the sign looks great and is not real intrusive, at least the proposed. Maybe we just leave the code as is, but add a line item for retaining walls that, maybe we put some kind of ratio or something that gives a size, or maybe we just maybe we leave it as is, but add a line item for retaining wall size.
The definition of a retaining wall.
And that way we can just add that to current code, and we could possibly leave some of the standards that we have, and not, maybe we can get that done a little quicker than reworking all of the sign standards tonight. What do you guys think?
I don't see the difference visually between a monument sign and you get the retaining wall there already, putting a few letters on it. I don't see that great imposition. Buddy, 200 feet from the road.
This one's 200 feet. So one thing I would play off of the gentleman who was just speaking was, I think that this sign that we're showing right now for this applicant looks very nice. It's conservative. It hits all those marks. But what we're talking about is not approving this applicant. We're talking about approving a language change in the ordinance, which means everybody down the road. And maybe not everybody down the road is 200 feet back. And all of a sudden you have 240 square feet right up there in the road in your face that we don't have a say in because we just went ahead and approved it based off of this very nice conservative look. And again, I'm worrying about that text of not being able to come back and have it come in front of us. I'm not trying to nickel and dime and slow the process down, but I do see the point of having some very garish things put out that we wouldn't have liked to have happen. But because it kind of got slipped in, not in a negative way necessarily, but just there's that opening and somebody might think that that's what they want.
I great comments. So I think that this is one of those situations where I think we might be able to go back and say they probably want a pretty good looking sign. And we can maybe have a little bit of leeway that way where we say, you know, a retaining wall, certain size, you know, kind of define it a little bit, say here's what's reasonable. And maybe that might be the easiest way to accommodate what looks good and still maintains good ruling.
Yeah, I think signage on retaining walls can definitely be appropriate. I think aesthetics matter, especially in the valley. I think what the applicant showed in their drawing was 135 square feet of signage. I think what the proposal was 240 square feet. I think that's a big gap. Just looking at that one nice, reasonably or tasteful example versus what could emerge. I think with signage, size does matter. I mean, look at a Motel 6 sign versus a Four Seasons sign. Which would you want to look at all the time, for sure? I don't think big necessarily means better. In fact, it could be worse. So I would agree that
I like Ron's comment to an extent. I actually wrote that when we first started as dark sky, and I think that's really important as you get bigger and the lumens that could come off it. I think reading our illumination code, Steve, it's probably something else to look at. Is like as we go bigger, how does that change? I wouldn't agree as far. I think it does need illumination. I think that's part of the aesthetics, and I think that can be done in dark sky. It's done a lot of places. So I would recommend that we keep lighting, but it needs to meet a dark sky minimum. And then some type of dark. There are different levels of standards that you guys can pick, right? And that can meet the code. So I can agree with that. Us in the valley, I like your point of thinking about what's in the best interest of the public. I think having beautiful signage, if we go to monuments, you just have someone just put something on the road, that could also be a downfall, right? So not changing could also be a detriment as well. So I think what this applicant's proposed is, I think could fit the character well with the valley. I don't think any of us are arguing that. It's the text, right?
So could we just add something that said, we would like to add a line item that for retaining walls that are in excess of this much, they're allowed this type of sign with that are in a ratio as compared to the picture that's drawn. So, we can see it's 200 feet from the road and it's this big. You can make a ratio calculation based off of that.
Like have setbacks.
Yeah, so, well, just kind of a setback ratio as compared, using the picture as a reference so that we can say, well, this is okay.
100 feet back can be this big, 200 feet back can be this big.
If we could just put something in like that.
How does that go? So someone comes in, they apply for a sign permit. Walk me through, like, if we approve this, what are the checks and balances after?
If this were to be approved, the developer would have to submit a land use permit for a sign, right? For a retaining wall sign. And we would verify that they're not exceeding the sign face limit. And we also would verify that they're meeting the sign setback. Currently, it's 10 feet from any right of way. The sign has to be set back 10 feet.
Is that from the hard right of way or like PU?
It's
Like
from
PUE?
the property line.
Okay. So it's not PUE necessarily, it's the property line.
Why don't we also look at the site triangle and dark sky lighting as well?
Yeah, so we'd review the sign code, where we would look at material. Well, currently we have a requirement that talks about the types of materials that you can use. But we would do a review of our sign ordinance with what they're proposing.
So question on the sign, the lighting is lighting behind the letters are offset from the background and you light behind the letters. Is that allowed under the dark sky code?
That is, as long as the letters are opaque and as long as the light color and the amount of lumens is appropriate, we call that, sometimes we call it halo lighting, where you're backlighting the letters. But you can also do like gooseneck lighting, which just comes out over the sign and over the letters and shines down on the sign from the top.
All right. So the applicant proposed this simple addition, subparagraph D. And did you just look at it as an opportunity? Well, let's change a few other things in the sign ordinance, is that?
As we looked at the sign ordinance, what we're referencing subdivision entry signs.
Yeah,
and
but he's
giving,
just adding a paragraph that says, well, what, 20 words? That solves the problem. Now you can put it on the retaining wall.
yeah, if you like what they went, that's totally fine. What they did, that doesn't hurt
Seems
my
like
feelings.
that's a simple way to solve the problem here.
We need to
Got into
define
a-
retaining wall. As I
Well,
mentioned, the ratio of
if-
setback to size.
See if we only do adopt the subparagraph D as proposed, then the planning commission still has review over the location and design style. Okay, it's where we start creating this new blue language and we've got some definition problems that need to be cleaned up. That we're having figuring out how this all
Yeah.
fits.
I think it does, but I think that's the bigger conversation that I don't know that we can have tonight. Kind of move things along. So I think the question is, do we want to look at this? We want to look at this and maybe add a language or two. And go from there. Just a suggestion. And maybe talk about doing a sign ordinance revisit later.
Yeah, I'd be happy with just adopting the proposed subparagraph D. The applicant on its way, because we're all happy with what we see in the pictures, I think. Gray Ranch,
Picture represents a 30-foot sign, and not a 40-foot.
yeah. So we. And then give staff an opportunity to clean up a little bit of the proposed language and review that at a future time. Then we talk about eliminating the planning commission review and all these other things at a later time, when they've had a chance to look at some of these confusing text changes.
I just have a question, Commissioner Burton. So if I believe what I heard you say is you're
Just considering a motion.
considering a motion that we would just approve this D, not change everything, just add D, is that right? So my only question, again, is with regard to the setback and size. This has size, it doesn't reference anything about setback. And so my only concern is the potential for something very garish in your face, 10 feet from the road versus this is 200 feet away.
Well, I would expect staff would come back within a couple of weeks with some of these cleanup changes.
You could do the ratio.
Or we could just set a setback of 50 or 100 feet just to meet with this. And as long as we don't create a legal non-conforming, right? These guys don't change the code and create a legal non-conforming sign. We could set our own setback here.
Yeah.
If we know we're coming back in 2 weeks. We could
30,
Okay.
30 and
just so someone squeaks by in the
Right,
next
so that-
30 days.
This applicant can get moving, but because we're not as concerned, we'd like this, it's more about the future. So they'd come back with new language.
yeah, the
to solidify.
concern, there's two things. There's the applicant's sign and what he's proposing, what he's trying to do, which we can all agree is not a bad thing.
Mhm.
The concern is that the code itself currently has some things that need to be cleaned up. we thought, well, we could propose it, we could see if we could get it taken care of, but there's too many concerns to address it all tonight. So the question is, can we add language that we would be comfortable with that says, hey, the retaining walls are okay with this with a certain setback, and then we can revisit signs at a later date when we may have more time, have another need to revisit the signs.
Yes.
So those are really the two things. I think what I'm hearing in meetings, we're just leaning to kind of saying, hey, let's add this ability to do it with retaining walls so that we can have a nice sign that looks and still is not intrusive and not change the code setup, but just have maybe a hole. So we're plugging the hole versus finishing the whole boat.
Agreed. The only thing I see missing though is that when you spoke, you said with setback, and I don't see that written.
Well, you would
Great.
add that in your motion. So if you were to make a motion, you would propose the D and then you'd read off what you'd like it to be and add whatever motion.
Yes.
Whatever text you would like it to be. That's what you would add. So if you wanted it to be no more than 30 feet, you'd say 30 and you'd say with a required setback of 100.
Okay.
I mean, however you determine.
Question for the director. When you made these proposed text changes in addition to what the applicant proposed, why did you do that?
It was just to.
Is that
make-
an important thing to update this sign ordinance?
No, we can do this and it'll be just fine. And leave the language how it is. It works.
Okay. And if you, if you felt so inclined, thought it could be improved with cleaning I think we have a little text problem here with definitions and how it all fits. But if you cleaned that up and brought it back, I think.
It's kind of a good point, text. So one thing I would ask the commission, the planning commission, is when we get these sent out, if we could read them and send back some maybe edits so we can help be a little bit more, if we can, as a group, let's try and do that.
Good idea.
So that we can, when we do see it, we don't just hold them till the meeting, so that we might be able to make those changes prior or have a better proposal when they come, so, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Any questions, comments for the planning commission? With that, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that the sign ordinance be amended by inserting the applicant's proposed new section D under 2 residential uses. Retaining, and that we are not approving the proposed text amendments that are crossed out and read at this time.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Can I ask the findings be added to explain the reasoning for the motion?
The reasoning for the motion is based on a finding that there's not much difference between affixing such a sign to a retaining wall as to a monument sign or a wall on a building.
Cortland, if there's a, do I have to have a second before we would look at a friendly amendment? Can that be done before or after a second?
You can bring it up right now if you'd like.
Okay.
May I offer a friendly amendment or? Everything that you stated with the addition of a required setback of 150 feet.
I'd like to have a little discussion on that. I think it's arbitrary. I mean, we're just picking a number. We are retaining the ability to approve location and design style. Location would include setback from the road.
Okay.
So we're retaining that ability for the future. So in this case, we're making a finding that what the applicant has proposed meets planning commission approval for setback in this case.
I want to make sure I understand. So you're saying that we retain the ability to approve location, but if the ordinance states that it can be placed on a retaining wall and it can be 4.5 feet by 40 feet, doesn't that just then meet? Yeah, it's because it meets the requirements. So I shouldn't be able to say, no, you can't put that there just because their wall is now 10 feet from the road rather than 200 feet from the road. I did pick an arbitrary number, but I'm under the impression that the numbers that have been picked are also based off of the aesthetic of this particular applicant. It's not moving forward.
You bring up a good point, though. There's another concern here with the road as the sign. So there's more to it than that. And I think that they're leaving that overall position in place with the planning commission, because this road eventually will be public road and it'll be a lot closer than 200 feet. And that's, you know, depending on definition, that could become a problem. So it may be best to stick with the planning commission thing, instead of trying to push, like, as you're stated, instead of trying to push it back, even though it's got some contradiction, at least you could have a say of, hey, can you change the sign, you know, or something. So just a thought.
Cortland, would that say we denied it because it was 10 feet off the road and it was as large as we said? We're like, hey, we don't feel like that's a good idea. Do we have legal ground to deny a sign application that comes before us like that, or in your opinion?
In the future, if
Let's say
if there's no
we didn't
setback
come
stated.
back and we didn't,
Yeah,
With the current code as established is what we're asking.
Okay, so if all you did was add the proposal for D, didn't say anything about setback, then it would be the same as what would happen now. If somebody came with a sign, you'd have to look at the current code, see if there's any kind of a setback requirement. And if so, you can apply it. If not, you can't apply it. Or if there is some kind of discretion allowed, then you'd be able to apply the discretion. And typically, actually, I don't know offhand if there is a setback requirement.
you said 10 feet.
Yeah.
So we could have a 240 square foot sign 10 feet from the road.
If that's what the code allows, then that's what you'd have to allow.
but we couldn't deny it if we wanted.
Right. That's my concern.
What you brought up, Chair, was a valid point in this case, that is gonna be a public road. Eric, how are you? Off that road. So I think I agree with you in this case. If we can ask staff to come back and let's update this. I can. Okay. With that.
We could, you look at that proposed D, put a comma after 40 feet. To exceed a height of 4.5 or width of 40 feet. Based upon setback.
There's already a 10-foot setback, right?
Right. My friendly amendment was to increase for this specific subsection D. A required setback of, and again, it was arbitrary 150. This one is 216. I decided, give them some leeway, 150.
It's really not, though. If you drive up that road, it's a public road, it's only 10 feet from the road.
It'd become legal non-conforming.
Gotcha.
It's just which road are you looking from?
It says highway from the highway. So it's
Oh,
and retaining walls. I mean, the reason you put them there is so you can build a road, right? So that you can, so that it doesn't, the dirt doesn't cave onto the road. So I guess the question is, are you okay with a 240 square foot sign, not necessarily the retaining wall itself being adjacent to the road?
What if instead of looking at setbacks on retaining walls, we look at ratio to size of the retaining wall? Right, so just the size of it. So, because the concern is not that it's bad looking sign, it's that you're right next to it, it's really big. Well, if the retaining wall is really big and you've got a sign that's proportional, that might be a better way to solve that problem.
May I make a request here? We've got a motion hanging out there with a friendly amendment, the way the rules of order read, that can be adopted with the unanimous consent of the members present. And I may be interpreting wrong, but it sounded like we don't have unanimous consent for the friendly amendment that was proposed. So just to, yeah, I was going to say, maybe the chair should declare that the friendly amendment did not get adopted.
So-
And then we see if there is a second to the existing motion. If not, maybe either let it die, or maybe if somebody does second it, then you can have further discussion, vote, or if it dies, then somebody else can make a new motion. But let's maybe kind of resolve that hanging motion.
Sure. We have a motion for a subdivision entry sign, or to add subsection D with the findings in the staff report. And then we have a friendly amendment. And it sounds like it has been denied or retracted. And do I have a second on the motion?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, any discussion on the motion?
So I think the matter of setback does matter. The original applicant asked for 30 foot, now we're saying 40, so personally, I can't see supporting.
I think there's been a lot of discussion about coming back with new language and this and that, so I'd say whether that's discussion for another time, basically. I don't know that I'm clear on what I'm voting on right now.
Okay,
So
so I mean, restate the motion
I've got
out there.
a comment on it. I'm picturing myself driving down the highway looking for my friend's house that's in Osprey Ranch. So I'm looking from the highway and I see, oh, there's Osprey Ranch, there's the road, I'll drive in there. People that are driving in there, this is, I guess, their home, Osprey Ranch. And it's, now you're going up the road, it's less than 200 feet off the road, or 150 feet, because the public road is going past the retaining wall. Is that a bad thing? If you have a very tiny sign there, it can't be seen from 200 feet away on the highway where you're looking to find Osprey Ranch. So you defeated the purpose by having the sign there, kind of impeding traffic or something, slowing down, trying to figure out where you're going. So when we get into aesthetics and subjective ideas of what's a good sign and what's not, then it becomes complicated.
Okay.
And so I think let's keep it simple. If it looks good from the highway, let's just do it. So you'd like me to restate the motion?
Yeah, why don't you restate the motion?
Can I comment first, Chair?
Yeah.
I'm looking at the sign code chapter. I just did a quick search just to verify the current setback requirement. And I don't know if staff knows of something different, but I'm finding in the sign, again, the sign chapter, it does talk about a 10-foot setback for entrance and exit signs for commercial and multi-tenant dwellings, but then it also has a 10-foot setback for monument signs and ground signs, monument and or ground signs. I don't see anything about a required setback that generally applies, and I'm not sure that would really apply to a retaining wall sign. So there might not be an existing 10-foot setback. So I don't know if staff has a different understanding. I don't know.
So if what you're
It's like
saying,
maybe staff does have a different understanding.
Cortland, if what you're saying is that we would be able to approve, it would come back to the planning commission. So if we were concerned about, if there was something that was out there when we make this change that comes, we would get to revisit it, and we could have standing to deny it, is what you're saying.
Or the opposite, if there's no clear prevention of or no clear requirement of a particular setback, you may not be able to just apply an arbitrary setback on an application. Because typically, if the code doesn't prevent a use, you can't just impose a use out of thin air.
Yeah, quick answer to the question. So if you look at what the code currently says, it's a subdivision entry sign and then parentheses monument sign. So that's intended to apply to a monument sign. Right now, that's the only kind of subdivision entry sign that's allowed. And so that would have to comply with a 10-foot setback. If we add a new type of sign, a retaining wall sign for a subdivision entry sign, then we have to figure out what that setback is, because at that point, Mr. Erickson's right, we wouldn't have a setback that would apply to it. And then one more little comment. The reason why the staff proposal changes from subdivision entry sign to neighborhood entry sign is because you may not want this to just apply to subdivided land. You may want this to be able to apply to land that isn't currently part of subdivision or part of single subdivision. So just a couple of things to think about as you're deliberating.
And sorry, not to extend this, I guess I am extending it, to extend this. The definition in the definition section says a ground or monument sign means a freestanding ground sign mounted on a base, but not attached to any building or wall. So if we're looking at that section where it talks about a subdivision entry sign, that is, yeah, defined in, let me get back to it here. In parentheses as a monument sign, but monument sign has a specific definition that says it's not attached to a wall.
Right.
So I would argue that that probably doesn't apply to anything more than a subdivision entry sign that is a monument sign.
Yes.
If it's a subdivision entry
Thank you.
sign that's a
Thank you. guys.
wall
Appreciate
sign.
So is a wall sign, I mean, a retaining wall is a wall. It's a retaining wall.
We're adding language for the retaining walls, what the motion is out there. So it would be its own thing now. So would you like to restate the motion or would you like me to try and get it?
Let me see if I can restate it. I move that planning commission recommend the addition of the applicant's proposed subparagraph D, that's in Delta, to say what paragraph 2 residential uses. And the findings to support that are that this addition appears to meet the requirements of the general plan and is not in conflict with other sections of the sign ordinance.
Land use code, right?
Yeah, and subject to the land use code
In dark sky.
and dark sky.
And then, so there's the motion, some findings in the code, and we have a second. And I'm gonna go ahead and just restate other part of that, which is we're not talking about changing the rest of the current sign code as defined, other than to add new section D is the motion. So all of the changes under section 110.25 and section 110.29 would not be changed in this motion. I have a motion, I have a second. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye. All opposed?
Opposed.
Nay.
Thank you. Looks like the motion passes 4-2. Would anyone like to explain their vote?
I would. This is Commissioner Wampler. I would have liked there to be reference to a setback. I think when Charlie mentioned the statement he gave, he said that this doesn't have any setback attached to it. It doesn't automatically revert to the one for the monument. And from what I understood from Cortland, we will be held accountable to the lack of language in the rule. So I think we should have a specific stated setback in the adoption of this ordinance.
Thank you.
I didn't oppose this particular sign. I opposed the amendment in general going forward with respect to setback and the fact that it could end up being out of proportion and not be additive to the community aesthetic.
Thank you. All right. With that, we'll move right to item number 3, public comment for items not on the agenda. If you'd like to make a comment, now is from the public, now is the time, and please state where you're from and state your name, where you're from, and please keep your comments to about 2 minutes. Okay. Looks like Jan Fulmer. Jan, you there?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Yes, I would just like to state a few things for the Ogden Valley Planning Commissioners to consider for the future, and please give it serious consideration. Number one, as you know, the county finally did pass, after more than 2 years, an ordinance on enforcement of short-term rentals. I'm very happy to say, folks, that what they finally went with was what you recommended more than 2.5 years ago. And it's just unfortunate that the short-term rental issue kept getting pushed down to the bottom of the list in terms of priorities, but it's there. However, it does not expand short-term rentals to zones where it currently is not allowed. However, you will be getting rezones coming up to rezone to zones that would allow short-term rentals. All I can ask is that you consider approve a rezone, let's say, for multifamily dwellings, but not for short-term rentals. Approving the zoning for multifamily dwellings, could very well be a viable solution for moderate income housing or something, but please not for short-term rentals. I do know that they're working very hard to get some implementation of the enforcement in place. But I also know a while ago when we sent them what the Gartner Policy Institute found at the University of Utah, there were far more short-term rentals in Weber County than they thought at that time. The other thing, if I just might bring this up, several of us have been Zoom attending some of the legislature committee meetings just to see what's brewing for this session of the legislature. And I know that and this is still in draft, nothing is final, but there is some, I don't even know if you call it a law or an ordinance, it's like trying some model sample, which would expand short-term rentals to 80% of the residential areas in municipalities, whether that's a city. I'm assuming an unincorporated area is some type of municipality. Again, I just saw what was in draft form. Please, if something like this comes before you, think about it. We have had some serious issues with short-term rentals, and when they get out of control, they will devastate communities. And we have said Weber County plenty of examples of where that's happened. So, commissioners, that's all I wanted to say at this point, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. Looks like Kay Hoogland has some comments. Please. Oh, looks like you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you very much. And that's Hoogland. We're very Dutch here, so it's a Hoogland. This is just a procedural comment, an administrative comment. I noticed that the prior matter, the applicant was listed as Wolf Creek versus the actual LLC that is managing or sponsoring that development. And I just like to say there's no such entity called Wolf Creek. It's an area. And also on behalf of the master HOA for Wolf Creek Resort, we are just cautious about inappropriate use of the term Wolf Creek out as by others and by entities outside of this area. So if that could be corrected in the record, that would be very much appreciated.
Thank you. Noted. Okay, any other remarks from or public comment for items not on the agenda? All right. Any remarks from planning commissioners? Okay. Rick, I think you've got a couple things and it correlates with some things that Jan said, so it should be great.
For sure. Just wanted to update you a little bit on a few things. Today in the county commission meeting, they did approve the moderate income housing change to the general plans. So that's something that the commission did today, that you should be aware of. Also, wanted to update you on the STR process. We are working with Granicus, the third party enforcement, and they should be ready to go live with 70%. They've scraped a lot of the area to find out who's in violation, well, what areas and who are in violation and who are not. And then we'll be sending out information letters to them, explaining to them the process. That will be happening on February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day. So, and then we're also working with Granicus. There will be a hotline number that we will put out on the site so that people, when they do see these violations and that, they can call the hotline number, and then they have, according to the ordinance, they have an hour to the manager, whoever is responsible agent. They have to make sure that the issue is resolved, or else then fines and that start. So just want you to be aware of that. Also, I visited with the commission about the general plan. I know that there was a few of you that asked about the possibility of changing the general plan. They do not want to start looking at that until 2026 at the earliest, but it'll most likely be between 2026 and 2030 is what they're looking at. But they do want to look at updating the numbers. They like that idea. So our staff is currently working on updating the numbers, so we can do that as well. We're also looking at staff of doing some modeling to give an idea of, like, specifically, we'll probably be looking at Newtown Eden first, and looking at modeling of how the street layouts will actually work in those areas. It'll be more conceptual, but as developers come in, I'll give them an idea of, you know, how the government institution area is going to work, how the transit area, how the neighborhood streets will work in that area, but then also how the commercial area will work in relationship to the kind of the walking area versus when you get to the four-way stop, you'll have a little bit more of a larger scale development in those areas. So it's showing how that will work.
Rick, do you mind if I ask, why look at that one and not Eden that's already been zoned to the, or been requested to be moved to that zone?
What did I say?
You mentioned you wanted to start doing the updating the general plan numbers and the layouts of the
No, the general plan numbers is everywhere. And so I'm jumping to a different subject about the modeling. This is separate from the general plan. So the modeling numbers would be inside all the general plan areas in the Ogden Valley, just updating those numbers. But because we've had some inquiries about Newtown Eden and that being developed, that's where we're looking at doing some modeling there. We could, but it's a cost factor. So eventually we will. We'll look at all of that.
When you say modeling, are you talking about like 3D renderings and things like that?
Yeah.
And then is that, so 3D, not traffic modeling? And
Correct. Yeah.
Got it.
Yep. Just more building modeling to kind of give an idea. So when developers come in, we can kind of, guide them a little bit in a better direction. Right now we have the street regulating plan, but this would actually, it wouldn't be an actual ordinance, or it could be. We could attach it to that, but right now we're just kind of looking at getting some conceptual things out there. Let's see, what else did I visit with you about? Wanted to let you know that the commission has given us the green light to start the Dark Sky Committee, which we're really excited about. So we will be putting out a notice in the paper for applications and things like that. So that'll be a nice thing we'll be able to work on. So I think that's all I have.
Ask a couple of questions.
Please.
So first, could you maybe just a quick summary of what the commission approved regarding moderate income?
Yeah, as far as the moderate income housing, it was basically what we talked about in our last meeting. They didn't change anything to what you approved. So It's basically, it's exactly what you approved in the last meeting.
And the short-term rental company that's involved, will they provide a report of their findings on what the actual volume of short-term rental units, usage?
Yeah, they're working on that right now, and we can provide that information once we get that, yeah, for sure. There are certain things that are not public information when we are dealing with court cases, once people are in violation. So sometimes people do grandma requests on those type of things. We can't give that information out because it's in litigation. But we can definitely get those numbers once we get those.
When would you expect to get?
They're only going to be 75% of the scraping on February 14th. So they're hoping to have that. I think they told us by the end of February, they'll have everything. So we should have some good numbers then.
Anything on current legislation?
Oh, yes, that's another thing. Thank you. So on current legislation right now, there is some bills out there, as Jan had mentioned. One has to do with short-term rentals, and they're looking at the possibility of amnesty. Some people are against it, some people are in favor of it. And so what I would, and amnesty is areas that are outside of the areas that are zoned for that. And it would allow a certain period that they could come in and become legal. And if you're in favor of it, or if you're against it, contact your legislators. That's where you're going to need to visit with them. So encourage all the public to, get with them. And they do listen. They're very concerned about your comments. So please reach out to them. There's also some land use bills out there that are looking at giving the state more control on certain things. So please reach out to your legislators if you are concerned about those things.
And state control is concerning, considering, something we just talked about with moderate income housing. We had to put together a plan that includes more high density. We have to have higher density in the valley based on what the state's saying. And that's some of the concern. I know that's of concern of those in the Ogden Valley. So yes, please contact your legislator if there's some things that you see that you're pro or you're against. But there's the concern is that we, as a planning commission, have very little power anyway. If the state comes and forces things even more, we have even less. So your voice would be heard less at these meetings and at others. So I would encourage, if there's something that is on there that you should be paying attention, you should call your legislator, your state legislator, and voice your opinion.
There are hundreds of bills that they're considering. Is there any guidance as to which ones are the land use ones that we can kind of narrow our search?
One of them is dealing with subdivisions and how that's working. And then probably the biggest one that I'm watching is the STR and the amnesty. Also, too, I just wanted to let you know that we are looking at things internally that we'd like to come and visit with you about making our meetings more efficient. We're trying as a staff to get our reports out to you on time so you can read them. And when you have questions, just call us. We have the contact information of the planning staff on there, and we want you to call and talk about those things with planning staff so that when you have those questions, you address those before the meeting. And we want to make our presentation shorter because we expect you as a planning commission to read your packets, to come informed, and then to reach out to staff when you have those questions, and then we can address those too, so that our meetings can be more efficient. We're also going to be providing dinner for you at every meeting, even if it's a short one. We'll do that with our regular meetings. We'll do that in our work session meetings, in our pre-meetings before, but in these type of meetings, we'll break out into the breakout room and we'll have lunch or dinner for you at that time. It's nothing great, but it's just something so you won't get too hangry. So
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, any Cortland, any remarks from legal?
No, not right now.
All right. With that, we'll adjourn to the work session, and that'll be in this room. All right. Okay, thank you.
His email.
That's the max. It can be under, but there's no stipulation on setback. So, yes, there to be setback. But yes, that is the max height. Well, thank you. I appreciate,
asking for just changes to their property is we're not looking at everything from a broader perspective. But the good news is the neighbors, 2 days after the meeting, called me. Actually, it was the neighbor's potential agent called me and said, "Hey, we've got pretty good sized development we'd like to talk about here." And so we kind of want to take a look at this from a community perspective. So that being said, we're not done looking at that map, but we're not going to be the ones that champion it through. We're going to make sure that we have applicants that are actually coming with intentions and explaining their intentions. So just to recap on that meeting and the email I sent to you guys right after, I just wanted to put out these 4 points so that we stay on track in our discussion today. Because we do have folks who are in the room who have specific proposals that they would like us to look at from a form-based perspective. And the more the planning commission understands how this is supposed to work, the easier I think it's going to be for them to address you on what they're asking for. So number one, I wanted to revisit the form-based overlay zone that we had been talking about for a good part of this last year. Where we left off with that was we had a request from Janet, and I think that was supported by a couple others, to see if we could just look at sending areas for most of the valley floor, and only looking at these form-based village nodes as receiving areas. So just sending and receiving. If you recall, staff proposed 3 hybrid zones. One is a sending zone, one is a sending / receiving zone. We could do both. One is just receiving, and those are the villages. I think it was cleaner to just go with sending only, receiving only, just to start. It kind of helps cut down on a lot of the complications. Back up and talk about the commission decided with that. Get going there right now. It helps cut down on a lot of the complications of having 3 zones, one being a hybrid zone. And then as we chatted with Commissioner Grower about this, as well as the other commissioners, they mentioned, let's start simple and let's just say, these are our sending areas, these are receiving areas, and just see what happens from there. As we left the final meeting, I think in November, the last time we talked about was the other request from the planning commission was to have a different map that says basically everywhere in the valley floor can send, receive, and let the market govern essentially how that's going to shape out. So at the end of the day, the county commission said, let's start a little bit more simple, a little more conservative, and let's see how this program works as it rolls out. And then we can kind of get into the ideas of where sending, receiving on individual parcels from an individual parcel scale can go in the future. This doesn't prohibit anyone from coming to the planning commission or county commission and asking for a new village to be considered. And so if somebody has a great idea and you guys love their idea, they can still come and ask for form-based to be applied. So I think we used the example of Browning Ranch when we were last discussing this in November. If Mrs. Browning or whoever owns the property in the future comes in with a really great idea and you guys love it, and the county commission loves it, we can certainly create a new village regulating plan for that area. So that option is still out there. They just have to go through the rezone process that we'll see other applicants go through in just changing these smaller areas. Okay, so that's where we left off with the overlay zoning map. The map, I'm just gonna. Yes.
Just so I'm clear. So basically, we just want to focus on sending or receiving would only be for now.
For now.
And that doesn't foreclose a discussion later on if anybody can be a sender and anybody can be a receiver.
Absolutely. That's right.
And the halfway was your Browning example. Somebody can propose no. That would fit under item 1, not
Yep.
number 2 for the future.
Exactly. Yep, you got it. So the maps that are being handed out right now, the red polygon represents the valley floor. And when we say how do we figure out how this line has been created, we actually looked at what the general plan says the valley floor is.
Can you put that on the TV?
Oh yeah. Sorry. Where?
I'm supposed to really keep copies of everything. Look. I'm trying to do better.
And Charlie, just to jump ahead here. So looking at your map, the PDR receiving areas, they're basically where the form-based zone, I'd say is, but also is proposed, because one of them isn't currently approved, it's just being requested, and that was what we need to have happen.
Hold that thought. I will answer that in just a second. I've got a couple more things coming around for you guys. This is just zoomed in areas. You don't have to look at these little tiny areas. Okay. So let's just to explain the maps and answer the question that Mr. Wampler asked. First off, the red polygon represents the area that your current form-based code or zone says these are our sending zones. And that is represented in this section of code right here. And so inside of this red polygon is all of the RE15, RE20, AB3, F5, FB3, S1, FR1, FR3, RMH16, CBR1, and FB zones. Each of those are different zones that are in the valley. Most of what you see throughout the valley floor is the either AB3 for agricultural valley 3-acre minimum and FB3 for forest valley 3-acre minimum. So most of what you see here is the zoning requires at least 3 acres per residence. But when you're looking at things like the RE15, RE20, we have those in the Wolf Creek area. Those are 15,000 square foot lots and 20,000 square foot lots. And then the F5 zone is a 5-acre lot. Or excuse me, yep, F5 zone. The S1 zone surrounds the reservoir, and that is also 5 acres. So just give you an example of what's inside of it.
What's inside of the red?
Inside of the red polygon, that's right. That's right. Now, when you look at these specific purple areas, TDR receiving areas, as Commissioner Wampler said, this is what the receiving areas would be if all of the properties in our form-based regulating plans rezone to the form-based zone. It's not what currently exists for receiving areas, okay? And so this would be the eventual outcome of where receiving areas would be if every property that is in the regulating plan rezoned to the form-based zone. Does that make sense?
Charlie, what's the current maps look like? They approved it with Old Town and Historic.
You mean the current form-based maps? These are them.
These roads don't even exist.
Some of them don't exist.
When did we do that one?
That one was done January last year.
How did this get so big and absolutely cover, like the receiving area was clear out? How did that?
This was all adopted as part of the form-based zone. Let me pull it up.
These are the ones that are currently existing, but last meeting you said the only one that's not existing is Nordic.
Sorry. These are the current street regulating plans.
So they haven't been zoned.
Okay, but sorry.
Look at this, it says that. But then
Yeah, this is what I read, that's why I was confused.
So what do you mean is big?
Then go back to the map.
So
Go down maybe.
this is the zoom in of this map here. These maps haven't changed. All I did, create this purple polygon, is I took the street regulating plans that you see in the maps that are already adopted and said, which color will allow receiving? And I put a purple polygon and outlined all of the colors, the street regulating plan colors that will allow TDR receiving.
Purple stroke off. Wow, it looks like it's a lot. If you take the purple out of
Okay. So if the ideal future were to come about, at least ideal from the form-based perspective, and every property that is shown on any one of these form-based street regulating plans change their zone to the form-based zone and is governed by the street regulating plan, then this would be the future of the valley, where this would be the receiving area in purple, and then everything with outside of the purple, but inside of the red outline is the sending area. Okay. So if you go back to where we left off in our TDR overlay zone discussion in November, and what the commissioners asked for the final outcome to be, that would be this map if I had to illustrate that in map form. Okay, now this isn't an official map by any means. I'm just illustrating what the current street regulating plans do.
What's the difference between the street regulating plan and the form-based zone?
Street regulating plan is a component of the form-based zone. So in order for the street regulating plan to apply to a piece of property, that property has to be rezoned to the form-based zone.
Okay, so if I look at this long purple one going along the highway, does that mean from out to 1880 to 1910, old mining town? Anybody builds anywhere in this purple has to do in 1880 to 1910?
No, architectural standards only apply to multifamily buildings and commercial buildings. So this area here in the street, the green street that is represented there, that's single family residential 1 acre. And so no, the architectural standards do not apply to it. But if you look at the orange, the red, the magenta, and the blue, the architectural standards do apply there. That makes sense? Okay, good.
Just as a point of reference, the old town and the new town, do you know how many acres the two or together this purple represents?
No, I haven't calculated that. I don't anticipate a final outcome of this just because I don't think everyone's going to take advantage of the opportunity. My suggestion to the county commission, once we have this rolling, is to identify the commercially zoned properties now and rezone them to form-based to give those landowners the opportunity to take advantage of this zone. But outside of that, I wouldn't recommend the county commission push the form-based on anyone. Wait for the landowners to ask for it. It does give a lot more opportunity, I think, for landowners. So I do think that there will be a number of landowners who will go in that direction. I just don't think all of them, especially where you see existing development has already occurred. For example, let's look up in, well, the neighborhood that we're going to be talking a little bit about, and momentarily is north of the Eden Park, as you can see on the screen here, up in this neighborhood, just north of that. The majority of what you see here has already been built out to 1 acre standard. This existing road here, going all the way up the road, going all the way around and then back down again, a lot of that has already been built out to 1 unit per acre. Okay. Now the zone is the AB3 zone for a lot of that. And so if there is any vacant land inside of that area, a developer would have to develop it to 1 unit to 3 acres, while all of the other neighborhoods lots are old non-conforming 1 acre lots. Okay. So what this street regulating zone would allow a developer to do, which we'll hear in just a little bit, is come up into these green areas here, maybe with this dashed line right here, and say, I want to put a subdivision in here. I'm in a light green area, and on our maps, we can see light green is rural residential 1 acre. Therefore, if I transfer units into this area, I could get up to 1 unit to the acre instead of 1 unit to 3 acres under existing zone.
Just for point of reference, is the cemetery where that dash line is?
No, cemetery's up here a little bit further, so hard to see here, but the dash line is right here. The cemetery is
Higher.
yeah.
Okay.
Is this the road to claim in this section? No.
Should be. Yep. Let's go down there. There you go. So it should be the same. Yeah, didn't make any changes to those. Okay, so Okay, so what the current form-based zone says about TDRs, I want to make sure that this is very clear. And I'm gonna pick on Shawn Clegg. Shawn, does everybody know Shawn? This is the proposal, or I'm just gonna focus in on a proposal that Shawn will be talking about in just a little bit. Shawn's looking at property up in this area here, I just mentioned. Looking at doing 1 acre lots in that area. It's currently zoned for 3 acre lots. But if he rezones to form base, he could potentially get 1 acre lots. Well, wait a second, if it's 1 acre lots, now it's 3 times as much as we would ultimately get, right? Not necessarily. So under the 3 acre rules, he might be able to develop 5 or 6 homes. While under the 1 acre rules, maybe he can develop 20. The difference would have to be transferred in. So he will start with the base density of what the existing zone he would sit in. So let's just say he's got 9 acres. If the existing zone, sorry. Mostly because I can't think when that's happening. If the existing zone, if he's got 9 acres, the existing zone allows for 6 lots, he can potentially do 3 lots on that. So he's automatically got 3 lots, 3 development rights available already assigned to the property. Okay. And that will run into, that will run with the land into the form-based rezone. So he'll come in, he'll get a new rezone of the property, it'll be the form-based zone. And just by the very nature of having it be the form-based zone coming from the AB3 zone, he has 3 development rights that run with that 9 acre parcel. Okay. And then he says, well, I want to do more than 3. I want to do 1 unit per acre, so I'll do 9. The other 6 he would have to get transferred in from somewhere else. So what we call the original 3, we call that base density. And what we do there is we just take the gross area of land, we subtract out any area that is very unlikely to be developed. And then that number we divide by whatever the zone minimum is. So in this case, we divided by 3, and that would tell us what his base density is, would be 3. And then once he goes to the form base, it's just, you could put as many homes along those streets as the street regulating plan allows, which this light green is 1 unit per acre.
And what you just described, that's already written and approved form-based, but.
Yes.
Make sure, like with the W property that, you gotta go back, oh, it didn't stipulate, this is all done, facts, figures signed off on by legal.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about CW because it's a little bit of a different story.
Already.
Yeah.
That was.
Yeah, it's, I think.
Your existing,
That's right.
when you switch to form base, you keep what you bought, and then you bring in to the new zone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Special rules could be applied by the commission under special circumstances. CW might be one of those, but by default, this is it.
Right.
So when Shawn comes in and says, I want to rezone to the form base, if you want to know what his proposal is, you look at what the street regulating plan allows. I recommend to Shawn that he not even focus in on a concept development plan because the street regulating plan should govern. Now, this doesn't show every street that is possible. Shawn may want to do like maybe a little cul-de-sac in here or something like that. As long as his proposal doesn't run afoul of our subdivision rules, our street connectivity rule, and the governing plan here, he'd be able to put other streets in there as well. And then as we change these maps in time, as the community changes, we'll just make sure we get in there and add in the ones that we've added.
Can they run a text amendment or in parallel, or do they have to do it first and then? Because as Shawn was like, let's say it was closer to yellow, and he's like, actually, I think it makes more sense if I'm a yellow versus a green, which is larger residential, right? And so then you look at that. But can you run those in parallel?
In fact, in order to ask for text changes, so verbiage changes to the ordinance, a map change, which they didn't have a street regulating plan, so we created an entire one just so we can talk about it. But also it will govern other parts of it. And then they asked the reason. So all of that was right in succession. Okay. In some cases, we wouldn't recommend they do that. In fact, maybe over by the 4-way where we did have a good discussion here and it was received a little bit more roughly, we may suggest that they go through the map change process before they even look at a rezone. They may say, you know what, it may be more advantageous for us to buy the property, ask for the rezone, get the rezone, and then ask for the map. So there are different ways to work. Just kind of depends on what they feel like the highest possibility is going to be. Okay, so this is again, all adopted. This is our municipal code, codified code, all online. So let's look at, so we're in our street regulating plan here. Let's go down to form-based zone transfers. And this is that section as it's currently written. Basically, it just gives you the calculation and the formula on how this will be applied. Any property that is rezoned to the form-based, we would say for a lot of parcel rezoned to the form-based zone. You get, what does that say? Allowed in prior zone. You get whatever the base density is that was allowed in prior zone, just like I mentioned. Okay. Part B, additional residential dwelling units are permitted on a lot that has street frontage on or gains access from a street type that is in the street regulating plan. Except estate lot residential, and the reason we say except estate lot residential is because that's listed as 1 unit to 3 acres, and we don't have the ability for any transfers in a 3 acre or greater zone, just by virtue of it being 3 acres, and all the other transfers that you'll be seeing is 3 acre transfers. So that tells you how does a landowner, if I'm a landowner, I'm going to come in and read this and say, okay, if I've got a right side for sale, what do I need to do, or how do I go about understanding how many rights I have that I can sell? And from a developer's perspective, from rights that they're going to need to acquire, this paragraph here explains what they're going to do. So go out to a landowner somewhere else in the valley that's in a sending area and say, what are your base density rights? How many units of your base density have you already used? For example, a 9 acre parcel out there in the 83 zone might have 3 development rights. They've already built 1 home, so now they have 2 available. And I'm going to come as a developer and buy 1 of those development rights from them. And now, if they were to ever develop that 9 acre parcel, they wouldn't be able to develop into more than 2 lots, one with their existing home and the other with the. Okay, so it retires, essentially retires or eliminates one of those rights from those parcels.
Unless they buy one, they can go on to and buy one.
Now they can go and they can say, I'm in the 3 acre zone. I've got this development restriction that says I can only do 2 on my 9 acre lot. I want to go rebuy essentially from someone else the right that I sold away. Yeah. And
Even if they're not in the receiving. Stand. I mean, I know we might change that, but
it's a good question, actually.
you didn't specify that they were.
You're right. You're right. You know what? The only ones you can receive in right now is the form-based. So when we do get back to the overlay zone, we'll answer that question a little bit more. Good question.
Separate.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying.
that's
That's where we got confused. We were talking about some separate overlay thing.
Yep.
Talking just about the village areas.
Yeah. So good question, and thanks for the catch.
And where's the, so I own 10 or 9 acres and I say I have 3 development and I've only used 1. Who's to say that I didn't sell the other 2 already?
Great question. So I'm going to turn the time over to Steve.
Okay.
Here we go. Help explain how the county tracks all of this so that we're not double dipping or allowing double.
While you're doing that, on the, how are you gonna deal with banking?
Let's see.
Because D says regardless of the number of development units transferred.
Good. I was actually worried we didn't have banking. So what this basically
That
means.
seems like it's, you can have more on a parcel than what you can actually build, but you can only build what's in the back.
What is allowed, that's correct. So, and this is specific, so if I transfer, let's just say 1,000 units into my 2 acre parcel, and I'm right next to the Old Town Eden Park. And the right next to the Old Town Eden Park, that's, it's colored red on the map, red means mixed use commercial. And I can build up to a 50-foot tall building, which is about 4 stories. What that means is I can put in, of those 1,000 units that I transferred to my tiny parcel, I can put in that building as many as I could fit of those 1,000. I still have to provide parking, I still have to provide outdoor area, common area, whatever other regulations are applicable are still gonna apply. And so if you could fit in market, so market is going to dictate a lot of this as well. If you could fit in market 400 square foot condos or apartments, then cram as many in that building as you.
And if you access on that parcel.
You can, but the only way, area you can transfer to is another property already in the form base.
Right. In H1,
In-
not that necessarily.
That's right.
One, but in everything.
Yep, you got it.
But they have to be approved in that zone.
They already have to be rezoned, yep, to that zone, that's correct.
The area.
They have to be rezoned.
Yeah, so if I
You're
were,
talking about the TDRs or the area? That's to be rezoned.
If I'm in another area, if I have a whole bunch in one spot in this area, and I want to move it to another spot in that area, I have to have that other spot I'm moving to rezone to this.
to the
To
form
the
base.
former, yes, because that's the receiving. Okay.
Yep, you got it. Okay. Steve, you want me to,
So that
Yeah.
handles banking right there. I can move them into my receiving, even if I only have, say, 3 acres, I can have 1,000
Yeah.
units and only build one home, but keep 999.
Yeah.
Okay.
now the idea of banking, I think is still important. We may even want to address that sooner than later, because you may find a landowner who wants to, I mean, a savvy landowner may realize this is new money, this is new, trading, currency, and realize, gosh, I want to get out there and start a TDR business and go out and grab a bunch of TDRs, but if they haven't already received the form-based zone, they can't assign it to any of their property. And so we may want to look at that a little bit sooner than later.
Why is that? Why can't we just look at this village zone?
Let's say they're not in a form-based area. So let's just go back
But
to,
what, so if they're not in it, they couldn't start a business and do that.
that's right. So what I'm saying is if we want to allow TDRs to be moving around, we may want to allow someone maybe over in this area to land bank, even though they would never be able to build those rights here. To land bank that so that they can then sell to someone who is rezoning to this area. Does that make sense? It enables the market to function a little bit more slick, which if you could break down it's gonna be a volatile market at the very beginning. If you break down the challenges of somebody actually doing the buying and selling in here, it's gonna happen more
So
often.
you're already asking, so what you're asking for is a step above, because currently, Jared has, 20 acres or something, 20 acres over there.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of going over them. We just,
Yeah,
that new Kobe Ranch, they just did a bunch of this and they're not in a form base.
yeah, so he has all this land. He technically has a bank, because he has one house on, I don't know, 20 acres, right? So he has, what is that?
Quite a few rights.
Yeah, has a bunch of rights, depending upon his zone. And so he's already banking, right? If you're talking about doing something else, you pretty much have to be in those areas as it's currently stated.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about would be trying to enable people to do that separately, which is,
Yeah.
I think, a whole nother discussion.
I agree. And yeah, we did have part of that discussion with the overlay zone. We may want to come back and readdress that sooner than later, but for the time being, you are absolutely right. That is not part of what the current ordinance. Unless you're inside of the form-based area.
So how did Kobe get all
So, okay, yeah,
It's farm based, because I thought, well, I know we're not supposed to call it, but Wolf Creek is an area, if I'm not mistaken, and I thought that was listed as one of the 7 village areas in our general plan, so why?
no, it's a great question. So as you look at this map here, we haven't created a street regulating plan for Wolf Creek, for Nordic, for East Huntsville, for the Snow Basin development here. What's that? Nordic. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean Nordic, I meant Liberty. Sorry, thank you, Liberty. Those are all areas that we've got to create a street regulating plan in order for form-based to even be allowed there.
So you can't even ask for form based until there's a street regulating plan.
Yep. In fact, form-based doesn't function unless there's a street
So
regulating
the
plan.
street regulating plan wasn't created until Nordic came and asked for it.
But you still can
Like Kobe and
transfer.
Wolf Creek.
Hold them.
Yes,
to-
Because
If
Kobe
they're not
Yes.
back and
It
forth
does.
out there.
Kobe is
No,
doing
Nordic,
it
yes, I'm talking about.
under the master plan
Yeah,
development.
Wolf Creek.
Aesthetic and mind,
So it is a little
the- all the things that we've approved, they're not the whole.
It's a
There-
nice
there are a
little
whole bunch of
side
things that
complication.
was
In there.
in their development.
Okay.
So.
Okay. that they've been thinking of moving. Okay.
This is Wolf Creek.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, they've got a development agreement. They already have a number of units that they could stir around in their development agreement.
Okay, so I shouldn't conflate villages with form-based village, because the original 7 villages, which I know we can do more than, but Wolf Creek, Liberty, all that, maybe they never go form-based, but
Maybe.
they're still a density pocket, which was a village in the general plan.
That's right.
Oh, okay, great.
That's right. And the confusion that you just mentioned is the reason why we changed the name. It's not form-based village zone anymore. It's just form-based zone.
Okay.
Because the reality is correct. Some of, in fact, getting to some of Trevor's concerns, when you look at how big the purple area is, well, that is really big. Even though, when you look at the details of it, a lot of these areas only allows 1 unit per acre. And so we're still looking at quite a bit of rural residential on the periphery of these purple polygons, rather than what would traditionally be known as a village, which is the high density area. In an ideal world, if we could get everything to form-based, including the areas between villages, just having those areas marked as a state lot residential 3 acre minimum, which is a reflection of what the zoning does right now. You would have a more comprehensive method of addressing form-based and development through form-based. Remember that I did a little.
You don't have to do form-based or form-based development.
And again, it's only for multifamily, because a single family home is not beholden to the mining aesthetic and whatever, it's just multifamily development
Multifamily and above
and commercial.
has to comply with, multifamily, commercial, has to comply with the development. So real family still have to comply with the area. The lot size requirements, so lot size area, street setbacks. That sort of thing.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but basically you can either go to this form-based village, form-based is basically a way of simplifying all the code into what you want to do in the plan.
That's exactly right.
Otherwise, you cannot just. Try to throw it forward, right? And the idea is like, oh, look. See, otherwise, we'll have to do that with each line of code, which you miss. So you have like the sign thing, right? The sign, we have to go through and change 1,000 and things. This is the idea. So if it looks like this, we're okay. So it's interesting. It doesn't have to be applied, but it's a way of doing it.
Yeah, it's different style than what our current it's called Euclidean zoning, where you chop it all up in color, the lots different colors, like our AB3 zone and our FB3 zone. Yeah, sorry, it goes back to a court case, but it's a different method than that. The Euclidean zoning is divide land uses, because if you have incompatible land uses next to each other, you don't have good community. That is the mindset of Euclidean zoning. Form-based zoning is things actually work better together, but it needs to be designed well, it needs to look good, it needs to function in the economy, and we need to be looking at, health, safety, minimum health, safety, and welfare, and you can have things functioning in close proximity, like you see in, downtown Ogden, for example.
Okay, Charlie, would you mind doing your email and make sure you got everything covered more?
Yeah, actually, the question about how are we tracking, is something that we asked Steve to look at, and so Steve's going to show us. He just handed something out. And
Yeah, I passed out a covenant that we currently use for transfers on sending and receiving, specific for accessory dwelling units, right? Because that's something that we've recently adopted, the allowance of sending a development right to somebody for the purpose of an accessory dwelling unit. What I wanted to show you, and we don't really need to get into what I passed out, is you'll notice there's a sending parcel covenant and a receiving parcel covenant. The purpose of this is to track. And I will say, my intention in my presentation, I hope I can get through this fairly quickly, and then I know the applicants requested just a few minutes, if you'd be willing to to entertain that so that they could go over their projects briefly with you. But in talking about how we track and make sure that no one's getting more development rights than they're allowed, we use these covenants, and we've done, sorry, let me try to share my screen here. We've done one that I'm aware of on an accessory dwelling unit that somebody transferred so that they could build a detached accessory dwelling unit because they didn't have 6 acres. So they bought the right. They bought the right. Yep, somebody purchased a right from somebody else. And it's both of these, sending is recorded on the sending parcel, the title of the sending parcel, receiving is recorded on the title of the receiving parcel. And what we do when we review a land use permit, for example, for this accessory dwelling unit, is we looked at, do they have enough rights? And our first thought was, well, do they have 6 acres? No, they don't have 6 acres. Then we could go to the title of the property to say, well, maybe they transferred a right. We actually have a map that we use on our gizmo now, so we don't have to go to the title every time, but we record these and we're tracking them on our GeoGizmo map. If our map shows that a unit has transferred, we'll look at this covenant and we'll make sure that the developer has the appropriate number of rights. You'll notice at the end of this page. Hello? Again?
Does anyone have 2 receiving?
You have 2 receiving?
I have 2 sending.
Oh.
I have one sending. They're pretty much the same. The title is
Sorry,
different.
someone might have 2 receiving. Yeah, they're pretty much the same. There is a ledger at the end, the last document, and I'd like to not get into specifics of that ledger tonight. And maybe what I'll do when we have a public hearing next about these items is I'll prepare a draft ledger for you to look at and how that will look. But essentially, we're saying.
Draft, when these are proposed.
No, so, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna, the ordinance doesn't require that you transfer them to enter to be rezoned. You can ask to be rezoned, and before you're allowed to either build or before you're allowed to subdivide, that's when we want to make sure that they're transferred.
So this is intended, so the way the ordinance works is after, let's just say, Commissioner Burton rezones to form-based zone, he might not know where his development rights are coming from at the time he does. He just knows that he wants to start thinking about it. A lender isn't likely to lend him money to go start building unless that lender has a sense of security the county can actually allow him to have that. And so he might ask for the zone first, and then afterwards go start looking for someone who's going to actually sell it at the price tag that he wants to sell it at. So they get the zone first, so the legislative process is done. And then just by virtue of the ordinance existing and saying exactly how transfers work, he would come to the county with a sending covenant and a receiving covenant for his parcel as well as whatever parcel he's receiving from. Or that will be sending to him and execute it. And that's it. He's then got the right that he is. Yeah. So making it stupid simple for the developer.
Okay,
Yeah.
my question is, a new question is, who can ask for a form-based zone?
Anybody can.
A single homeowner that lives on 20 acres and I can just ask to be rezoned.
Yes.
to form-based,
But
even if I don't have any plan at the moment.
If we don't have a street regulating plan that governs
Okay.
your area, then we wouldn't give you that zone.
Okay.
It could be given, you have to drive and go through the whole process, and it would most likely get.
Okay.
The reason why we regulate plans because the general plan is not true, it's computer, whatever
Okay.
this is.
Okay.
Someone's computer. Oh, okay, I can't connect for some reason. I was trying to earlier. When you were talking about who can, maybe it'll let me connect, who can ask for it, I think that leads into a good discussion of the applicants, right? And so in the last month or two, we've received 2 applications for rezones. They're both here tonight to the form-based zone, and they're both in the Old Town Eden Village area. One is for residential. Charlie was talking about Shawn's development for residential, and the other one is for mixed use commercial. and Mr. Chair, one of the applicants requested just a few minutes to kind of explain their project. My intent tonight is not to take up more than 15 minutes of your time, but just to get you familiar with the areas and how they relate to the form-based zone of Old Town Eden, and to maybe let the applicant share a few things.
So are we moving on from the transfer development rights discussion? Have you gotten everything covered that you wanted to cover?
So up to getting a sense that everybody has a pretty good understanding of how the current zone works. I think now that we've laid out how the current zone works, I think it'd be appropriate, Mr. Chairman, to talk to the landowners about their
I
proposal.
just want to make sure we're covered here and then ask if there's any questions. We're all clear on what.
After we're done with that, we need to come back because there's still language that we didn't get to review in our last meeting that I want to make sure we're. So I think this is going to be a good opportunity for us to say, here are some case examples on how this works. And then once they're done, these guys don't have to wait for us. And we can go back and look at that proposed changes if they don't want to wait.
Is there any questions about TDRs first?
These documents. So you get this thing in place. And the county commission decides that there's. Then all that half acre come. What does that affect? All of this stuff.
So we've got a handy little note at the bottom of the ledger on the back page. Estimated density calculation is an estimate based on info given at the time of the execution of this covenant. The actual number of development rights available depends on multiple factors such as existing zoning, future zoning, development standards, area unsuitable for development, and survey level accurate legal descriptions, etc. Any future development right transaction shall require a new development right transaction income. And so if you come and you say, I've got 1,000 development rights assigned to this property here, we're going to go and say, man, you probably do. And you want to sell 1, 2, forever. We're probably going to say, you know, we'll take a good look, make sure that we've done the formula right, make sure you've done the formula right. But if you don't have survey level accuracy on your 2,000 acre parcel, we're probably not going to make you go get a survey of that. We'll just use county records. But if you come and you say, I've got a small property, I think I have 1 development right on it and I want to sell it to Trevor. At that point, we may ask you to survey it and say, let's just say you're in the 20,000 square foot zone. Survey it, show us that it is actually 20,000 square feet if you don't already have a survey. And if it is, then we'll get this executed with you and you can do the transaction and call that.
Okay, so hypothetical, I got 6 acres, I got a house on three. I theoretically. I assume it's so. Okay. Now the county comes along and up zone, so they don't require 3 acres, they require 5 acres. So
at that point,
now can I build on my? 6 acres,
that's
so I got 10 lots.
That's exactly right. Yes, so here at the top, with property parcel ID number, property zone. So if you get up zone, that will change. And then property net developable acreage, and then property estimated base development rights. So at the point your zone changes, you can come into the county and say, hey, I need to update this because my zone's different. We'll say, okay, what's your zone? What's your base density? What was it before? How many did you already sell? How many of your rights did you already sell? Okay, now you're up zone, so more are added, and it'll just be a line item in here, basically. That'll basically say,
so I sold one.
But
I still got 6 acres. Okay. When I sold 1, did the receiver, he got 1, but now did he really get 3?
No, just 1. The receiver will have a receiving
But
document.
I sold 1, so I've got.
You gained 4.
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, what you're saying is you can't upzone the form-based zone. Is that what you're saying then?
Once you're in the form-based zone, there is no up zone unless you change the zone. So
if you change your street color, you amended that.
you could.
That doesn't give you more density, it gives you the ability to add more density.
Potentially.
Yeah.
You're right.
So I guess with my 6 acres, under the new zoning, I would have 12 development rights. I sold 1, now I've got 11.
Yep, you got it.
Okay,
That's
all
right.
right. I just suggest you look at the wording of the end, the last sentence, paragraph 6. And we'll look at that and also that
contractor consideration that decided. So let's say Jaren has 20 acres and he goes, I think I could sell getting 1 acre lots approved in my area instead of 3. And goes and gets a rezone to the 1 acre. Then he comes back 6 months later and goes, I want to go to the form-based village because I want to sell the form-based village. He can do that. So we can increase the.
So now I got 20.
So now you can,
Right, so that one, so.
you want to sell because you can. So basically, we're opening that door where people are, I mean, if these things are worth $50,000, but I can't sell them. Right, so I could go and rezone, but I couldn't realistically build. Now I'm going, well, I can sell it, so I could rezone. I could, oh, sell, I'll rezone and I'll sell
So the door is already open to get an upsell. The general plan says no new density, and so the general plan recommends no upzoning at all. But you can, if you like an idea, you can have a recommended county commission upzone, regardless of what you guys want or don't want. County commission may go ahead and do an upzone on case by case basis. And so that's already a potential. And we do definitely need to consider the possibility for the future that we're not making a bigger mess for someone to try and undo in the future. But we did contemplate that, Commissioner Burton, the possibility that zoning allowances do change in the future.
Is there a place the public can go and see how many density rights you have?
Yes, so Steve mentioned that these will be, let me just show. Oh, you're, okay, good. We do have, where we keep our zoning right now is on the GeoGizmo. So if you want to know what zone you're in, you go to the GeoGizmo. You want to know how many lots you can get in your zone, you go to the GeoGizmo, you click on the zone, it'll tell you what zone you're in, and it'll actually give you a link, go straight over to what your
But I
zone
want to
is.
find all my density, so forever, when I sell my property as a 20 acre piece, how does that new buyer go and find out?
So your property will show up with a specific polygon. Go ahead and.
It's on title too.
Yep, it'll be on title as well.
It's a closed title.
Well, hopefully you're looking at that. Hopefully you have better title than that, but yeah.
I'm gonna toggle for a minute. This is kind of a work in progress map that we use. A few months ago, someone actually put for sale.
Sorry, it wasn't a few months ago. That was a long time ago. Turn those off. I just don't want to confuse everyone. I can explain what that is in a minute, but
Yeah. You can see if I toggle, there's a, okay. There is one that was, okay.
one right here.
That's one way.
So that is, there's an accessory dwelling unit and somebody in a detached building, and somebody got the right to do an accessory dwelling unit by transferring density onto there. Now, this particular person transferred it from over here in Evergreen. We had a little loophole that we didn't realize was there. We closed that loophole, so you can't transfer from, well, frankly, outside of the
Just
vet colony.
accessory dwelling units, to be clear, it's not.
That's right, it's just an ADU. And then I think, is that ADU as well? These guys did an ADU. Every, go back up to Nordic. The Nordic property will show this as soon as their development agreement is executed. We'll also be reporting the covenants with those. So it'll show up on this map as well. And then if you click on one of those parcels. What does that say?
References a part. Right now, it just references, I believe, the parcel.
There's a document, it's more info.
Document. There you go. It's right there. And then
This.
scroll down to the bottom. Sorry, I'm demanding, sorry, please.
So this is on an individual basis. Is there a place where the public can go and see how many development rights are left?
So we don't have that, and we'll never be able to calculate that because that number will change as property boundaries change. For example, if you've got 8.99 acres, right? You've only got 3 development rights in the 83 zone, or sorry, 2 development rights. And so if we were to calculate everything and say, we think it's about this much for these properties.
I think there's 10,000 out there.
Okay, I see what you're asking. Not right now, but we do plan on, when we're redoing the numbers of the general plan.
Right, which is something you're going to,
yeah.
real numbers. So that's what I'm saying, why wouldn't
We will, yeah, we will for the plan itself. We'll be able to see where the numbers are, what's out there, what's remaining. It'd be really nice if we could actually create something that automatically adjusted every time we saw transfers going, or a new development happening, but something like that isn't as easy to put together. But when we do the general plan again, and we update those numbers, we'll at least have a new baseline.
In our earlier correspondence, you indicated that to transfer out the development right, it has to be conceivably buildable land.
That's right.
So that's not something you would go and be able to judge in advance.
That's right.
everywhere. You would just do that on a case by case basis.
That's exactly right. And
so if somebody has 50 acres and half of it's on a steep slope, you would physically have to look at it, or would you have to get an engineering report?
So if it is an abnormally steep slope, like a cliff, where we can't see any possibility for them to get roads that zigzag up the steep slopes and still meet our rules, we'll ask the applicant to prove that they can actually develop the amount of lots that they think they can. And that point, yeah, engineering, we would ask for probably a full layout of how they think they can get that amount of rights.
That begs the question. I've got 5 acres. My neighbor's got 4. How many development rights do we have? So we transfer, can I transfer 2/3 of the development right? We can transfer.
If you were to consolidate under a single ownership, so one parcel, then yes, you could do that. And then the two of you could have your own private agreement on how you're going to divide up whatever money comes out of that. But you would need to have a consolidated parcel because we need to have something to record the document to. And getting it a fractional would be, what's that?
You could record it against both of them.
Could.
I guess what's question is, is there any code, is there anything against doing partial?
Extraction.
Yeah, so right now it says round down. And
Round
so-
down.
Round down.
So they have 8.9,
You have 2 in an 83 zone. If you go to, if you're Commissioner Wampler or the neighbor to Commissioner Burton and you buy the 0.1 acre from him, you do your lot line adjustment, now you have 9. Now there are 3, as long as it doesn't actually reduce his amount. So we would look at if he has a ledger that runs with his, we would look at that and verify whether or not he's actually reducing
He
his
wants to
size.
sell me 1, now I got 3.
But we're buying and selling whole numbers.
That's right. Whole numbers only.
Right, we sold 2.
To receive. Right. I just,
That was the discussion.
That's right.
I want to make sure that, for our new commissioner, because of previous conversations that I wasn't clear, and we talked multiple times in the past about, it's come up that some land, we've had residents who are engineers and they say anything over 40% grade or whatever isn't buildable. And we've had that discussion multiple times. And the consensus in the end was you can do the aggregate. And so therefore, it was, if you have 200 acres and there's some of it's 40%, you can have all your development rights and put it on a portion of the land that is more developable, but you get the rights. I just want to make sure it didn't get lost there.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. So
You mentioned, well, if there's a cliff, yeah, but we've had experience,
You're right.
but they don't need to get an engineer, they get all the rights.
you're right. So our current code, outside of the form-based code, we've got a subdivision tool called the cluster subdivision code. It allows you to essentially designate a bunch of your property as open space and take whatever rights you would otherwise be able to get from there and smash it into just
Whether
a
you
smaller
develop there.
footprint. Yep. And so when we're looking at developability of a piece of property with slopes or cliffs or whatever, if that land is eligible for a cluster subdivision, we may not even ask them to do the engineering report to prove they can get up the cliff because there's already a tool that would give them the same amount of numbers that they wouldn't have to deal with the cliff. And so under those circumstances, we wouldn't ask.
But they would have to be eligible for that type of stuff.
That's right. And the cluster subdivision code is not allowable in all zones. And so, yeah, but the FP3 zone, for example, Nordic, the perfect example, a lot of slope on the Nordic property, but they already have the right to take all of that and cluster it in the corner. So why wouldn't we say, fine, take that and move it, not just cluster it?
What does this mean? I'm looking at paragraph C. Any future development from a transaction shall require new development
Covenant.
And covenant, not,
But just,
Cortland, what do you think we meant by that?
yeah. Yeah, I have two actually.
Yeah, Courtney.
Oh, it's sorry, I'm not blaming you. I think we just.
That's a
meant-
good question.
I think we just meant new covenant, but
It's not that my point is made. Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
good call. We'll catch it. We'll.
Okay, well, let's move on to. Work session item 2.
Yeah, commissioners, yep, I just briefly want to show you the location of these, both of these rezones really quick. I guess work session. Let's be looking at the agenda. Work session 2 and 3. So work session number 2
Is Shawn.
is right here on my map. You can see it shown on location 1. Now, again, this is the street regulating plan of the Old Town Eden form-based zone. Now this is the location of number 2. So number 1, what we're going to look at, one of the first things we're going to look at, if he were to be approved for a rezone, is what's he asking for? Maybe he gets approved and then he submits a subdivision application. Okay, well, he can only put 1 acre lots on here. We're going to verify that he's got enough development rights to do that. Are you okay if I show a video at the request of the developer really quick? John, you got any intro comments to this or?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just be really brief. The intent of what we're trying to do here is save Sunnyfield. We want that to remain a farm, and we want to make it as doable as we can, but farming is not cheap. Farming is not easy. It doesn't make a lot of money. We could take that land and develop it out, 3-acre lots, and could make a lot of money doing it. That is not what we want to do. We want to keep Sunnyfield Farm as a farm. We're trying to take some development rights from that to this parcel up here. That's 23 acres now, has currently 7 developer rights. We want to transfer 8 development rights into it, so that'd be a total of 15. We could go up to 23. We don't want to do that. Our intent is not to overdevelop or whatever. So this will average out to be about 1.5 acres per lot, with 15 different lots. And then what that does is it makes Sunnyfield Farm a little bit more viable to remain as that. Honestly, the land at Sunnyfield Farm, if we did those in 3-acre lots, we could sell that for a lot more than we would be selling these 1.5 acre lots up in the subdivision that I live in. So I do have a vested interest in that. It's right. I mean, I look out my backyard, I'm going to be looking at these homes, but I would rather it be there and keep Sunnyfield Farm. So again, just a short video, just kind of about Sunnyfield Farm.
For context, you're all probably aware Sunnyfield Farm is also in this village area.
Show the gives on that.
Yep. And then now.
I thought my wife alone kept you guys in business.
So this, on the Gizmo map, this is the location of Sunnyfield Farm.
Zoom in a little bit.
And what's the zone?
Right now, I gotta turn on the zone up for you.
Please.
Please. I mean, you want to do it more? Most of it's zoned AV3. Okay, yeah, CV2 is not part of Sunnyfield then?
The CV2 is not a portion of this. We've
This is-
parceled that out,
got
so
it.
it's just the agriculture.
But it goes all the way over, right?
It does, it wraps around the cemetery.
There are no orders.
So how many acres is that?
That was
So,
all red.
not
This would not be rezoned. So this parcel, correct me if I'm wrong, everybody. The farm itself wouldn't be rezoned. So what we're looking at here, we're just talking about.
That's right. To give you context on the.
He's just talking about taking it from the farm to there.
And if you remember, like Charlie mentioned, form-based code says you can go within, if you're in a form-based code, you can send from within a form-based to within the same form base.
He's not in a form. You just confused us again.
Sorry, let me back up. Let me back
Not
up.
in a form
He's in a
base.
village area. He's in a
He's
street
He's in an
regulating plan.
AB3.
Right.
He's on the street regulating plan. That's what I mean to say.
And he doesn't have to rezone.
It doesn't have to rezone.
He only has to rezone the receiving.
In order to be a receiving area. he
If
has
he
to-
did
Receive, we can send permitting.
Remember, I said the farm is good to send, but
I know
it has to become form-based to receive in that neighborhood.
I'm glad we did a case study because I thought it was smart, but yeah, I get it. So question before you play that video back to you. How does staff think about this? You're taking density from red, moving it to green. I hear that, right? He has a farm, he has a right to keep that farm. But you're taking red density away, it can always be added back, I get that.
So one of the questions that Trevor asked in our last meeting is when I was proposing making some adjustments to the Nordic plan as well is why do we need to touch this? Why do we need to adjust? And my answer was because we have more information or things have changed or whatever.
Remember that?
And when we're looking at the Eden area, knowing that Sunnyfield is actually retiring rights off the property, we know motivations are a little bit different. We might suggest in the future, maybe, elimination of some of these roads. Because we know the landowner's not interested. We know that they've already taken the steps to move the development rights from the AB3 zone out of there. Maybe this isn't appropriate.
So we shouldn't be looking at colors necessarily, saying it's okay to go up to that density, but taking away from shouldn't weigh in, is that what?
I don't understand.
So my question is, if he's pulling away from the red right here, we don't think about a rezone saying, hey, density's moving away, because that's okay, that's the applicant's right.
Yeah, and in the future, let's say we don't ever change this, just going along your line of thinking there. We don't ever change it. If Sunnyfield says, you know what, we tried really hard to keep this farm alive and make it pencil. It's time, we're done. The regulating plan shows orange for mixed use residential, which still allows a little bit of commercial. We're ready for that. So they come in and ask for the rezone, even though they did transfer some rights away. So their base density, when they ask for the rezone, is going to be a little bit less than it otherwise would have been. And at that point, they'll go looking for rights there. So they can actually build them with that.
He said there's 36 acres, it's 83, I'm guessing that's 1.3, right?
23 acres.
No, Sunnyfield is 36, where it's going to its 20.
Right. And so Sunnyfield Farms, where he wants to take development rights and send to what he's asking for a form base, he has 13 or 12 to send. And he can send all 12 if he wanted, or he can send 2, whatever he wants. It's his land. You will record the taking away of.
Yep.
It'll go from 12 to 9 or whatever. And then once it becomes form-based, he can send however many he wants, because he can send from him or by or do whatever in the world he wants.
That's right. You could only build up in the, on the 20.
In the form base, which will be up above.
Yep, he can only build enough to allow for what would otherwise create 1 acre lots, because that specific color only allows 1 acre lots along.
Okay, one more question, sorry, and this kind of goes back, thank you, this is like a test case, and we'll get right back to your actual proposal. But so
Great timing.
if he were to be, and you're being about, if he were to send all 12, as long as he retains ownership of that land is
Sunnyfield.
and undeveloped, because he's sold off his rights.
That's right.
Until it gets put into another form base, and then he can just start sending in anytime he wants. But at the moment, that is undevelopable farmland, or fallow, whatever.
This covenant would act as a conservation easement essentially. Even though it's not technically a conservation easement, it acts as.
That's different. It
a
wouldn't be a
development
conservation
restriction.
easement, it just wouldn't have any rights.
That's right.
Because conservation easement is different.
It is different. Yeah, but it would act, yeah.
In that scenario, they would have to rezone the form base, which would not be it's still a rezone, still has a public hearing, still has all of the hoops they have to.
What are you talking about right now?
If you were to try and go to Sunnyfield to start developing it.
Okay.
Once you sold all that off and start again, it'd be the same as today, as if I wanted to go and get a bunch of development rights.
Right.
And change it, I just have to go and ask for a rezone.
Yes,
That's it. Process.
yes.
And for you, is that as an applicant, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I think, I mean, this is like the case study this is exactly what the plan, what the form is. This is exactly the scenario, right? We want to keep open spaces in, how does it work, corridors, certain corridors, open and cluster the development, which this is the exact type of development cluster that we want to see, so.
At the receiving land right now, what is there? What is that land right now?
It's wrapped around 1 acre lots, wrap around it, and then it's vacant.
Vacant. So it's not farmed or anything.
No. I mean, we had, Sunnyvale had some cows on it.
Yeah, but there are houses right next, it's like, what is that, Eden Acres neighborhood, is that what that is?
Yeah.
Eden Acres, and the cemetery is that square?
Yeah, top corner.
Yes, that square is the cemetery, okay.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get, I mean, the developer lives right behind it, so it's, I mean, it's all.
Oh, no, I'm just trying to make sure I know where we're talking about.
It's not as good as you can ask for.
Now, when the applicant comes in with a subdivision, you guys will have the opportunity after we've reviewed it and we think it's good to go, you guys will have the opportunity to say, does it actually fit the street regulating plan? If he does propose maybe a couple other streets, maybe a cul-de-sac or whatever that street regulating plan doesn't have on it, does it still fit the intention of the street regulating plan? And so those are opportunities you'll have when he proposes a subdivision.
We do, I thought you told us that by approving that, basically it cuts out that need for a meeting and you guys can just say, yep, it meets it, you're good to go.
For the transfers, they still have to go through the typical subdivision process.
Okay.
So you guys will see these developments as they are coming down the pipeline.
It's like every other zone.
Okay, I thought we were eliminating. Like, he was like, if you approve this, it cuts out a few.
It cuts out some of the minutia of trying to figure out who needs all the requirements, kind of gives the standard.
Okay.
You guys want to watch a movie?
Cheers. Let's go.
So yeah, Shawn just requested that we play that, but I think Commissioner Schuman, like you said, this is a really good example to show how that transfers can be beneficial. I imagine anybody who drives by this area or anybody who lives in this area doesn't really want to see the farm be developed necessarily. And so if Shawn's able to get a rezone and then to transfer those units, it does exactly what the general plan is asking for. I don't know if you guys had any more questions on this specific one, we can go into the other one if you want, unless Shawn, unless you had anything else. So the next applicant, rezone number 2, got Zane and Lance Frower. I hope you guys have some drone footage of your transfer area. Yeah, just to briefly go over theirs, and I'll let them talk if they want to as well. But there's what about 3 acres? There's a parcel right here that's zoned CB2. And then there's these parcels. There's one that's 0.63 acres in the AV3 zone. There's 0.60 acres in the AV3 zone, and then there's 0.89 acres in the CB2 zone. All proposed to be rezoned to form-based. This area is a little bit different. It is mixed use commercial. The developer's plan is to have a mixed use commercial building on this street corner. The idea would be to have retail on the bottom, just like our form-based ordinance says is required. That retail is on the bottom, and it's right along the street front. Got sidewalk and walking bike path along the front of 2300 North. The second floor would be residential, so it'd be condo apartments. And in order for that to happen, there needs to be a rezone to form-based, and there also needs to be some transfers. And I don't know if the developer's prepared. I didn't ask them to prepare to speak about where those units are coming from. And I don't know if you guys want to get into that, but we don't necessarily need to ask them that question right now. We need to ask them whenever it is they plan to build these condos above the retail that they want to do on the second floor, or on the second floor.
Could you zoom out a little bit?
Sure.
Right, it's Brian Carlos and Harley. There's a white house for rent on the corner. I think your white picket fence got taken down.
On the other side of the street?
Yeah, across, there's the
Okay,
FedEx and all that stuff, or whatever that is, UPS store.
Yeah.
So that includes the parcel where the FedEx is or
It goes around it.
around it, okay.
North of the. Actually, all the way around it. So it starts directly north and then wraps around.
Can you click on the
to the
FedEx
east.
store? That parcel. I just want to see. Okay, so you guys do own that. Sorry, this way.
And the intention, at least my intention tonight, is just to get you familiar with the property so that when we do hold a public hearing, likely at the end of the month, that you'll be able to, we've already had this conversation, you'll be able to go and make a decision, more informed decision. I don't know, Zane and Lance, if you guys had anything you wanted to chat about.
Not much of a question.
Cool.
Ask.
Are we looking at the funny shape above, or also the big rectangle below?
So we're talking about this one,
Uh-huh.
this one,
There you go, he'll drive a car.
this one, this one.
There you go.
Where- Okay,
Every
so
parcel.
there's 2 green ones as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So 5461 or if it's longer.
What's the one? Okay.
1, 2,
Yeah,
3,
the corner, and then that, the 3 of them, 4 of them.
Is your intent to leave that commercial? Because you're not rezoning the commercial that's currently there, where All West is and where.
Correct. That building's already there, and we've got 3 tenants there now. So let's just leave it the same.
There's a drain field on that property. There's quite a bit of parking lot as well, and a pretty significant setback from the street. And so it's not unreasonable for the owner to maybe think in the future about doing form-based if they wanted to and info if sewer comes. But it's not part of their proposal now.
Now, this one is I think another good case study, because the units that are being sent into this area are actually from outside of Old Town Eden. They're from the valley floor. And we may get into that a little bit in the public hearing that we'll hold at the end of the month to show you exactly where those units are coming from if you want, but.
I guess, why does it matter?
That's one of the things
And I'm asking genuinely, what am I missing? You guys told me.
The goal,
Does it?
the plan.
No, I mean, does it matter that we know where they come from?
I think the public will want to know. Sure. Shouldn't it matter that they're on the valley floor though? You don't want somebody transferring something from Ogden.
Right.
I agree with that. Right.
No, I just mean.
Because it's like an audit.
But Steve and I have been talking about this. That's why I mentioned earlier. They may just want the zone today. And our plan suggests that we should allow that to happen and let them, after they get the zone, go explore with their financiers where they're gonna go pick up the development rights. And so the idea that I was hoping to convey in our last meeting was, we're not asking when they're asking for their zone, where the development rights are coming from. We're trusting that we put together a decent zone and some decent requirements with some covenants that when they know, at the point that they do know where those rights are coming from, it can just happen administratively, doesn't even have to have a formal review by the planning.
And that's why I asked the question, because it doesn't have to happen at the time of rezone. Why are we asking the questions? Why are we going through the disclosure process?
Right now, we're just showing you guys so you can kind of see how it works. But if they were to come maybe a year from now, if we kind of get our feet wet and we know what we're doing, and ask the question, and they don't actually know where they're coming from, I would encourage you to not ask. You don't need to know.
Okay, and they can ask, going back to my original, because they have this, which is a street regulating map, and you have to have this to ask.
That's right.
They don't have to have that to ask.
It is.
Has to be a place to be approved.
Okay, to be approved.
Everyone has a right to ask.
Gotcha, but to be approved. Okay.
We don't have, like, and I say the form-based zone doesn't have to happen. It's just like any other zone. Just because we spend a bunch of time on it doesn't mean we have to. Clear.
Okay.
Like we can go, oh, no,
Not ready.
and we realize this doesn't work.
Yeah, and just because Charlie and Steve are saying you don't have to see where that's at, you could still require it as part of the zone, the rezone. So you could say, no, we really want to see, an idea where that's coming. So if that doesn't give you that comfort level, a rezone can't do that.
I guess,
Legislative.
Rick, because that would be if someone's like, I'm gonna do a 400 unit condo tower right here, and you're like, where in the hell are you gonna get 400 units from? Is that kind of
Right.
like, is this really feasible? Like,
Yeah.
show it to me.
So
Is
they're
that
not
the-
gonna be asking for a 400 unit condo tower at the time they're asking for rezone. If they are, they've gone ahead and they've started designing something.
That's why this is not something we have to jump in, right?
Mhm.
You look, that's a big contrast. I mean, and this is a perfect example of it, because that could happen here. What is this red? This is red, right?
Mhm.
So this is already there. We could say, oh yeah, let's put it in because it's a good thing. But you got a contrast that he could be thinking, well, I'm gonna put 500 homes here. They don't even know it yet.
Mhm.
And they don't have to tell us. And we just go, oh, well, okay, yeah, that seems like good. And then we've got the contrast of Shawn saying, we're gonna try and free the zone here where we're getting it from, and we're gonna put 1 acre homes here. And this is the plan. So it's not, gotta think twice about it, just to be clear.
Kind of like, I want to buy this car. But it's not going anywhere without it. The gas is still only under the requirement, including the TDO.
I think it's without a gas tank, right? This could.
Gas tank.
Like, that's really even like,
Might be put-
Screen sharing isn't coming across that Zoom.
Yeah, I'd actually take that analogy and say it's like, I want to buy this car, but I'm not sure where to buy the gas for it. Of course not, sure, because it's just gonna be depending on the circumstances of when you're running out of gas.
And it's somewhat dangerous because you could put it there and then forget about it.
Oh, yes.
10 years later, we'll go, ooh, damn it, that worked. But the new change.
So when you're looking at these form-based rezones, once the applicants have gone and subdivided the property into whatever the resulting property they're going to be, they're at that point entitled to get a building permit for the design of their building, as long as it meets the minimum 8. Every single one of them have 8 design standards. In this case, this would be the 1880 to 1910 architectural
That
style.
can change too. They could build one building, they could come say build one house, and they could be like, I'm gonna buy 10 more. And do it. They'd have the money. I mean, it's a pretty open door.
I don't understand what you mean.
Well, so I buy this corner and I put one house in it just because I can, and I sit on it. And then I go, I go acquire these over the next 10 years. And quite frankly, our shift or the general plan that we find in 2026 might say, we don't really like that spot as an area, just per se. And then he comes and transfers all this over there because it's still there. So it's kind of it's a stretch, I think. It's
Well,
something that-
we kind of got that already because we had a plan, we had a zone in place and we got that strip commercial building that's right behind it. We really don't like that. But now we have a form-based code in place that shows regulations of building design that are much more in tune with what we want right now.
So when you're looking,
So.
Yeah, that's a good thing, for sure.
Like that strip doesn't have to then update their look, their grandfather did.
Unless they go to the zone.
Yeah.
when they, so that's a really good question.
If they are grandfathers, they go to the zone, they want to make a change. They'd be legal non-conforming.
Yeah,
Right, it'd be legal non-conforming.
So this building as it exists would be legal non-conforming, allowed to stay in its,
If they change to the zone, is what.
if they change to the zone. But if they then come in later and say, we want to make some updates to the exterior of the building, well, those updates would need to meet the requirements of the new code. If they say, hey, we've got a lot of empty space on the front edge, we want to build some street frontage, that would need to meet the requirements of the new zone. So yeah, over time, we anticipate that the old building will be phased out or surrounded by what our design standards show. When we're looking at,
What's gonna happen, Charlie? 10 years, that building will be in style.
that's right, that's right, and at that point, we change the design standards and go that way.
And wear fringe and
Hang on, I
tie-dye.
want to get to you, Commissioner Wampler, but I want to make sure everyone's solid on this idea. The street regulating plan shows mixed-use commercial coming around through here. When you're thinking about a rezone and going right to Commissioner Trevor, sorry, I forgot last name for half a second, to his point, think about the fullest and best use of the property in that zone. And so and the mixed-use commercial zone allows 50-foot tall buildings. It allows residential above commercial and behind commercial. And we don't say how much residential, we don't say what size of residential. But we do say it can't be one home unless it's a flat that's above commercial. So that is in the code. But we could see that as long as these buildings that are consuming this entire frontage are built and designed to a particular standard, yeah, and it really gets kind of the rule of the roost and put whatever uses that they want in there. So
There are some limiting factors. I mean, you have parking, and that. So there are some, and right now it's separate. So there are some limiting factors that are kind of built into it geographically.
You said that's
Hopefully
50, would be 50 feet tall.
Maximum.
And that's 4 stories.
Roughly,
At that.
roughly, because the first story commercial has to be designed with a 15-foot story, and it has to be designed with post and beam interior and exterior foundation or load bearing wall, excuse me. That way that first story can convert to all kinds of different commercial uses. Hopefully breaking down the barriers of getting new commercial uses in there in the future. But then when you get up to the second, third, and fourth story, we don't say how tall that story needs to be. It just needs to meet the minimum building.
And the 50 feet, was that established for the form base?
Actually, we started with 40 feet for the form base, but we changed it to 50 because Nordic asked for that.
That's not Nordic. Well, you made it universal.
The intention of form base is to try and get universal standards so we're not guessing on every new development. But I'm thinking we may even want to readdress that and go back to 40 now that Nordic has their approval and they're entitled to go to 50. We may want to go down to 40.
I can just tell you from my experience in other ski type towns where you get hillsides and flats and you get these big things sticking up in the middle of the flat area.
Yeah.
People don't like it once they see it.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So the developer's in charge of putting the roads in.
That's right.
What about that roundabout that's in the back?
So we would need to work with the developer. We can't ask the developer to do anything that's not unreasonable given the impact of their development. Technically, we can in a rezone, but
But is it kind of like? Sorry, go ahead.
It's but when we make that rezone, that's a big hole, I think. You look at that roundabout, if we rezone to the form-based zone, we're potentially adding, you could say 500 homes there, possible.
I haven't done the math
You
yet.
can transfer.
It's actually one of the reasons why we want to do modeling, because we want to explore floor area ratios to determine if the market does support maximum amount of residential
You know,
units. what can-
you talk about what could be done there, and sewer is like half a mile away. It's not that difficult to get that. You could put in a parking structure underground, so you could put all kinds of parking there. You've got parking, you got sewer, you can put tons of homes there.
That's right.
That's gonna affect the road, and we've already done the zoning, so how do we even ask for them to come back and pay for that?
Yeah, so the road improvements don't come until subdivisions. And even then, some of the road improvements don't come and might not come in until certificate of occupancy. So that's just standard. We never ask for those road improvements with the rezone. We might obligate them to putting those improvements in the future through like a development. We did that with Nordic, for example. But in this case, when the applicant comes in and asks for the rezone, we're just coloring the map a certain color, giving the applicant a sense of comfort that they can go get financing to do what they want to do. Then they come in after they've gotten all the financing, give us their engineering specifics, tell us exactly how they're going to design the road, the right of way, show us that they're meeting our minimum requirements for street design, as well as other requirements. And then they escrow for those improvements, and then they install those improvements.
So what's the difference between doing this in just a regular zone? Seems like we're kind of doing this other than it creates a blanket zone, because you could do this, you could say, I want to put commercial with residential, what is that, the CD zone?
Right now, we've got CBR1 that allows a little residential that goes with it. At least we have historically allowed that, but most of our C zones don't allow any residential to go with it. So there is no true mixed use C zone. That's why. Form bases the one.
So back to my question of the roundabout, is there something established that if you're putting in a certain level of development, that will obviously increase traffic in the area that you are responsible for at least a certain percentage?
Yes.
That's established.
Whatever is roughly proportionate to your development's impact on that street. So when we say roughly proportionate, we're going to ask for traffic impact studies so that we know how many new trips this particular development is going to create versus how many trips are already on that road versus how many trips that road can actually handle. We do know that we've got a cross section that needs to be installed by the developer, which will actually support quite a bit of traffic. And so if they just go ahead and build to the cross section that we've adopted, it will support max build out of these areas.
In my experience, I haven't ever had a county or municipality pay for roads, it's always been the developer. That's been my experience, you know, it's developers build roads, counties and own and maintain them, right? That's been my experience. So I think being a developer, you just have to understand that the cost you're gonna have to bear when you look at doing stuff. Is that fair? Correct.
Yeah, the road is still will be the county. So the question is.
But you got
Road expansion, yeah.
Even when we've done road expansions, picked up sidewalks, picked up curtain guards, right, it all bears on the developer, which bears on the end person to sell of the product.
Does this form affect the zone affect any of that? The same way?
Runs the exact same way. Exact same way. The roundabout, on the other hand, it might be a different cost. We may not be able to. UDOT's telling us roundabout is about $4 million. We might not be able to say that the developer is responsible for $4 million worth of the roundabout, but we can ask for the right of way for the roundabout to fit there. And we can ask for a certain amount of minimal improvements that could help the creation of a roundabout be less burdensome. $1 million. That's the one that I know, the one that they're building. It's a kind of a glorious roundabout, but the one they're building out there on 100 South and Huntsville is.
I'm building the wrong stuff, I guess.
Okay, but the rest of that, I mean, Old Town Eden, according to our forecasted plan, would be form-based and it would be mixed use. And so each new development that what comes in, wouldn't they also pay in a percentage? And therefore we can reach the $4 million without going.
You guys were doing it tax figure separate, right?
Yeah, we either put it on the impact fee plan, or we would work with the developer to create a PID. That's what Nordic is doing, creating a PID. That's what Snow Basin is doing. So that there are funding mechanisms to create those intersection improvements in the future. Honestly, by the time a lot of that happens, I think you're gonna have a city up here. Whether or not this incorporation that's people are talking about now goes through, 10, 20 years down the road, I think you'll have city. At that point, you have city taxes that you could, the reason I said that is you got city taxes you can bond against, which right now without municipal tax, it's really hard to float tax increment bonds.
One more question. It's a little bit of a side note, but it works on both of these guys. That becomes form-based. And he's got the right to do it. Yay, we're good to go. The person who owns, like, say, a little bit right next to it. Can they, because there was something when Nordic went form-based that the residents around Nordic got like a letter that said, if you would like to become form-based, you can request it, or something to that effect. I might get the wording wrong, but there was something where some residents were like, they could opt in or something like that, which reminds me of this banking can happen if you're in the form-based. So could the resident, it might not be a realistic scenario, but say there's like a one single little house right there. Could they opt in to also join that rezone, even though he's not part of this new development? But he wants to be form-based so that he can start banking.
Yeah, the White House on the corner. Yeah.
Well, I thought that was part of their property.
No, this way.
Well, I thought that was part of what they were gonna.
Oh, that one.
There's the little old White House right there.
That's not moving. I thought that was part of what you're gonna pick up.
No,
Okay.
that's where that little house will stay there at this point.
Okay.
Are you not rezoning that property?
Yes.
Oh, you will be rezoning. Okay.
Yeah, we want to rezone that property,
Okay.
but
So to your point, let's just say this goes over here and it jumps over the road because that landowner says, you know what, I want to piggyback and get the form base.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I don't need a new road program and I don't need to develop anything. I just want to jump into that zone that's right next to me. And therefore I get the right now to start buying and banking development rights. Okay, just wanted to.
Yeah, so that's another good reason why, as I've thought through this from top to bottom, I keep on saying, trying to grease the skids for those developers to actually make this realistic. Because if we do that, we can actually get TDRs actually moving into these areas. The more inhibitions, the more roadblocks that are in place that they've got to overcome, the less likely it is that they'll even entertain them.
So one further, the last program, the 23 acres up next to Eden Acres, could a homeowner in Eden Acres say, I want to piggyback and sell on a bank? And would that just carve that one house?
If that's the only homeowner that wants in. Yeah, at some point, if we've got quite a few of the homeowners asking, but others not, so we got like weird patchwork.
Disjointed, yeah.
We may just go ask the other homeowners if they'd be willing to do the same.
Okay.
When we're talking about piggybacking, would that be a separate application that any owner within that area could do at any time? It wouldn't be connected necessarily with this one.
It might be.
Unless the two owners got together and said, we want to file a joint application, would that even be allowed? And
So all three, it could be this owner comes in and says, I just want to do my property. And the guy across the street says, ooh, piggyback that one in too. That can happen.
That's the same thing that happens today.
Mhm. Yep, you can do that, or the guy across the street can file their own application, or they can just from the very beginning come in with a joint application. All three of them. And you guys may only see, it's possible, you guys only see 4 of the lots. And it isn't until the county commission looks at this that they say, ooh, maybe the guy across the street wants in too. And they ask the question, or the guy across the street goes and asks. You guys might not even see the one across the street. So, answer a lot of questions, a lot of clarity. It's a good opportunity. As soon as Steve told me that we've got 2 of them looking to ask the question, I thought let's make sure we smooth out confusion that we started last week or 2 weeks ago.
Well, Jimmy John's help did with that.
Thanks for being our test.
Yeah.
Test case.
Thank you.
I know they're real, but I'll let this work.
Mr. Kobe was next.
Okay,
Is this just not showing the red or putting on red?
no, it's hard to see. That's why I gave you the blow up, the bigger version.
Oh.
Yeah, turn it.
There's no red.
Are you?
It looks like it's like another. Red.
Yeah, I'm
Like if
sorry.
you look at red over here.
Got it. Actually, that's magenta.
Oh,
Here, I'll show you, just to make sure you're clear on what the ordinance actually has in it. Get to here, let's look at the street regulating plans. There you go. Oh, dang it. Thank you. Oh, did you change? Can you go back to whatever it was on?
Steve.
It was on Steve.
Yes, well, Steve changed to hook up his computer.
No, it was. Well,
Yeah, there is a trash can behind Rick if any of you want to
Clean up
dispose of your
after-
trash.
clean up after.
Well, I know you're all grown-ups and you always do that.
what?
Written as, which is this form that you want to be already, is that correct?
That's right.
So that, but what we just talked about were very small pockets. This is very large purple.
Yeah.
So it would actually not be this, it would just be these two little pockets over in the Eden area that are gonna be purple TDR receding and northern.
That's right. That's exactly right. Until other landowners choose to go form-based.
What was the purpose of making such a big purple switch?
Because if all the landowners actually go form-based and follow our street regulating plan, it'll be that much.
Okay.
purple.
So we made that. We created.
No, I remember that. It was just that, I just want to clarify, like, that those, now we're talking just real much smaller areas that are gonna be reality,
Yeah,
but this is the proposed.
Yeah, the idea is like, you have, like, right now, we say, we want certain growth in certain areas by saying, this area should be commercial.
Yeah.
Like, and this is saying, this is what we want, so if you kind of go this way, we might approve it.
Mhm.
That's how the zone based maps, it's like, oh, well, which makes it, that's another interesting point, because it goes, you know, what liability do we have to actually convert, you know, if someone lives here and they want it, what liability do we have to give it to them? When you first put this in, you said that we pretty much had to, I remember, because I asked the same question. But is it zero?
It is, so this is a legislative action. So the county has full discretion to say, no, we're not rezoning these ones.
That's not right.
After it has been rezoned, at that point, we don't have any option. They can develop under
Discretion is gone.
That law, yeah.
so that may be what we want.
But and then you have precedents, right? If you did the one next door, you said, hey, I don't think it's right to redo your, if you did the lot next door, you created precedent.
Rezone,
Yeah.
precedence doesn't exist under legislative action. And so somebody can come in and say, you're not being fair, and all the county commission has to do is say, we're looking at the public interest and we
That's
don't
it.
have to be fair. Not saying that they should not be.
Unless there's some kind of illegal discriminatory
That's-
motive or something.
Yeah, that was
So that's-
for Portland.
So that's suspect and quasi-suspect, but as long as you're non-suspect, which is gonna be mostly.
Which is why you.
I'm gonna use the word
emotions.
Okay, and both Cricket and Purple, because they're not transferring in, they already have a pot.
Yeah, they're just.
And they're just moving it within the Wolf Creek area, but it's a pot they already own, they're not bringing it in.
That's right. Now, we will still think at some point in time, create a street regulating plan for Wolf Creek.
Right, but that is not to do with them being informed.
That it will at the time, if people move into form base in the future, but it has nothing to do with what development's happening now.
Okay.
Good. Sorry, Commissioner Schuman, I just pulled this up so you can see their argument covers there. Okay, I'm gonna hand this out. Sorry, it's one at a time because I didn't staple it. Still passing, sorry.
Gotta teach you how to use that function on the new printer.
Oh, we have it. I didn't realize we had that function.
Bill knows how he'll teach
Oh,
you.
Yeah.
Look at you.
Are we on water right now?
This is the-
It's very good.
I've been calling you Scott.
You get outvoted.
Way to go. Yeah, is that?
Okay.
Them doing what?
So if you look at what you have in front of you, we already reviewed what's on page 44 in the last meeting,
Yeah,
as well as 45.
somebody will have to.
Incidentally, on page 44, I did notice I made an error. I put 104-22-7.030 after 104-22.8. That's not intended to happen. I'll flip that out.
Blue is new, this is new.
Blue underline is new. Yep. But it's not new from last meeting. We reviewed all this in last meeting. This is just addition of pathways in the form-based zone area. Okay, flipping through the street regulating plans, this is where on page 50 is where we started talking about maybe some new lines over in the Newtown Eden area, new commercial lines on the map. You see here, we're just sticking with what's already there. Flipping the page over to page 54, that is the Nordic Valley area. 55 is just the blow up of the Nordic Valley area. 56.
Yeah, these are the same, this is what's in your Nordic, these are the change in Nordic.
Yeah, so actually that change is still shown on this. If you guys would rather us delete it, I mean, we could do that and just stick with what's already in the code. Again, I recommend that.
I think it needs to apply both ways. If we're gonna stick with it that way, like you said, let them make the changes and we need to be universal.
Okay.
That's my opinion. I don't know if you guys, because the reason the ones aren't changed in Eden is it new, what do we call that? New or old?
Newtown Eden is at the
New, we stopped there because we want to say let the applicant do it. I think we did the same with the other ones, so we're not, sounds fair.
We could do that. Pitch a bid, just a question on this. If the reason why I think this is a little bit different is because we're not adding new development types in the area, so it's not like we're expanding the type of development that could be allowed there. Does that change your opinion on that at all?
I don't know if it changes my opinion. I get the point, but
What was it, this one, you just shifted the road a little bit or something like that?
Yeah.
Is transparent to the public, would they know that this is in there?
We'll make it very clear.
as it is, I don't think it is.
Is there private property that this would affect that maybe they want some time to?
It's actually the private property owner has had the conversation with us and said it. He's not looking at doing form-based because he doesn't have water rights to allow for transfers that of more than what he already is working on. But he does know that he wants to lay the streets out differently. And so regardless of whether or not we change this map now, he's probably going to lay these streets out differently this way for the lots that he can build given the water rights he does have.
Yeah, so this is different from the original map. It shouldn't be, these are different and in some ways it makes it a more with the topographic, well, it's with the layout. So before we had it laid out just kind of straight. And what the concern, what the argument is Charlie brought this, which seems fairly reasonable, but then we also have the same discussion happening here. And the talk is of changing these to red and making it line up with exactly where they want to put, where the current landowner wants to put the road. And we felt that it's, that we can start looking at the landowner when they want to make that change, to come and make that change and not us be like, well, we're just gonna do what you think you want to do. So that it, I mean, we want to make it easy, but we that's kind of facilitating them to do. And this is bring it, show it, let everyone see it. Yeah. So that's why I say, yeah, it's a small change and they probably want to do it, but at this point, because maybe it's just timing, I don't want to make one exception for one and not the other.
Okay, we'll keep.
That's my opinion.
Yeah, the counter argument to that is, well, I just was kind of focusing over here and I had to put some lines there. It was late at night and I was hungry and I just threw some lines. Then after I reflected,
That doesn't make any sense. This line should have been down here. So aren't we just refining this map a little?
That's the argument that I'm standing on, just because as we learn new things about the lay of the land or the constraints of each parcel, we're gonna need to come back and make adjustments to the lines.
I think you're right, and I think I normally I would say yes, but I really don't want to say we did it for one and not the other, and kind of set that.
Bad.
You gotta have a reason to do it.
Yeah.
And right now, we're doing it just to, as a benefit, so we cut one step out for one guy, but not cut that same step out for someone else. What would be the finding that would support doing it now?
I think the finding would be that it better follows both property lines and topography. That one finding, another finding could be potentially that it doesn't increase densities in the area, just reconfigures the road layout. If you wanted to do it and make it fair, but.
So those findings are general and they benefit everybody, they're not specific. Just the person.
I wonder if there's like a way to your point, Trevor, is like, it should probably be fair, and then also, is it, how does it get disclosed, right? When it does happen, we just do it at a commission meeting, or is a work session sufficient, just to say, hey, we.
No. They have to have a public hearing, it'll be in a staff report.
But the thing is, what he's proposing is with all of these other changes.
Yeah, it's buried.
That's the hard part.
That means it's
buried,
Yeah.
not.
It should like.
And like I say, I don't have a problem with it. I think it makes sense. And then further, I think, I don't know if it's the right timing.
That's okay.
I
Well,
agree.
let's push pause on it. I'll make sure the map that you see in the version that goes to the public hearing, just the one that's already in there. So no changes to it.
Please,
I'll-
I mean,
I'll-
I agree. It's just timing, because I don't want it to look like we're burying this and, you know,
Yeah.
have it brought up in the main public hearing. Hey, look what you did here. You should do the same to help me make this easier.
I'll hold on to the changes for some future date when it makes sense to do, when you guys are comfortable. Are you guys okay with that? Okay, so moving past all the maps to page 59. Okay, so this is the form-based zone transferable development rights. The intention that I had in writing this the way that it's currently written in front of you is to not change the way that it works for the Ogden Valley. It is simply to add in language that will allow us to do this in Western Weaver as well. But Western Weaver is okay with bonuses. They're going to be incentivizing transfers at a 3-to-1 rate out there. Whereas Ogden Valley says, nope, 1-to-1, period. And so part A shows transfers generally. So this lays out just the general rules that apply in both Ogden Valley and in Western Weaver generally. So base density, it says basically the same thing, just made a couple of clerical changes. And then part 2, transfer density, that says substantially the same thing. I just make sure we got a difference between Western Weaver planning area and the Ogden Valley planning area regarding rural residential. And the reason for that is because in the Ogden Valley planning area, rural residential allows 1-acre lots, which would be a receiving area. In the Western Weaver area, they already have 1-acre zoning out there. And so a 1-acre lot area out there would actually be a sending area. It wouldn't be receiving. Okay. So just in part 2, just providing that distinction there. And then getting into part B, Ogden Valley planning area form-based zone transfers. So transfer allowances and limitations. Basically saying the same thing. We're saying where they can come from and where they can go to. Don't make any changes to the zones that are being suggested. And then transfer ratio for Ogden Valley says the transfer ratio shall be 1-to-1. So this is new language right here. Just trying to make it very clear that there is no transfer ratio. This means for every 1 residential development right transferred from a allotted parcel in the Ogden Valley planning area, 1 is allowed to be transferred to a allotted parcel within the form base. Just 1-to-1. Now, if you look at transfer ratio, just trying to stay consistent in C2, that's where you see the 3-to-1 ratio. Okay, so C1 and C2 for Western Weaver doesn't apply to you guys, so you don't even need to care. But if you do, go ahead and read it.
So, question on B1. We said prohibit a development agreement
saying something otherwise?
No. And that's a really good observation to make. As tight as we may make all of these ordinances, anything can be modified or changed, or the applicability of anything can be modified or changed through a development agreement. And so as long as that development agreement has been run through the same process that it takes to create rules, create laws. So public hearing, notice, public hearing, planning commission recommendation, and then county commission final decision.
The intent is though with this form-based code that we end up reducing our. That's the hope. Because we have these specific regulations.
Okay, on page 60, there is a paragraph that is titled transfer ratio incentive, that again, that applies to the Western Weaver area. And then line 758, which is part B of this section, is actual developable rights. Now, I don't know. Oh, I did. So the black line is already part of the code. So this isn't substantially being changed. Regardless of the number of residential development rights transferred to the lot of parcel in the form-based zone, or the applicable transfer ratio, the number of dwelling units actually constructed shall be limited by what can be constructed given compliance with the standards of the chapter. Just keeping it. Sorry, I saw confusion. What this means is you can't build all of the rights that you transfer to your property if you're going outside of the standards that the form-based zone allows. So if the form-based zone, that's right. The form. If
So this relates to the transferee only.
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure I understand transfer. Yes, the person who that is receiving. Yes, this only applies to them. Okay. The rest of it is innocuous, I think.
I think Commissioner Burton needs to review it. I think you need to review it, make sure it makes sense.
But under that D, it doesn't say anything about, it doesn't specify banking or there's no language of that, but it's just saying that you can only use what you can do within the ordinance. But it doesn't say anything about like, you still own those development rights, you just.
That's right.
It's just doesn't state
It doesn't explicitly say banking is allowed, and at some point in time, we'll probably might want to make adjustments. I might even make adjustments to the next version that you guys see, just so it's clear that you can bank. But yeah, just the way it's written.
The way it's written makes me think you can transfer all you got, but you can only use what you have, and it doesn't say anything about what you haven't used.
You can only use what the form-based zone allows you to build. So if you're in, for example, if you transferred a whole bunch to a lot that's along a street that only allows 1 acre development.
Like Sunnyfield, what they're trying to transfer from the open area, they're transferring it to the 1 acre lots. The maximum they can do is 1 acre lots. He's not proposing that, this is what he says, but you could do up to 1 acre.
No, I get it. I'm just saying there's a
vagueness.
there's a lack of a line saying what happens to the rest of your events. Because it's called actual development rights. It sounds like what you actually have. And you don't actually address what they actually have. You address, regardless of how many you brought in, you are limited to constructing only what you can with the ordinance, great. And then silence. It doesn't say about the actual, what's left.
So
thanks.
No, that's what I'm bringing
So
up.
that brings back that troublesome concept we talked about back on the old Snow Basin Road intersection.
Yep.
Where do they evaporate or are they kind of still there and can be used somewhere else?
And that is exactly, I think, the point that Commissioner Walker is bringing up.
So always, is that still floating out there, the evaporation gun?
Yeah.
Or we decided we're not gonna make things evaporate, we can move them around because that's
so
general plan stuff.
But I think that was but this is all within the Google-based village.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just that overall thought.
I'm gonna make it more clear so that it is clear that it doesn't evaporate. Those rights are still allowed to be moved, transferred within the form base, even if you can't build it on that property.
You bought too many for this place, but you can sell them to somebody else, use them somewhere else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'll make sure that's clear. I'll clarify. Okay.
Final question on 602. Back. Coming back to the first page.
Oh. Going back.
So we got this pathway running between fence lots. And it's a minimum 30-foot pathway.
public right away. First blush, that seems pretty expensive.
Pretty wide, it is. So the big concern that, I think Commissioner Jenkins was the one who brought it up first. He said, if you've got these narrow corridors running between lots, especially between 6-foot tall fences, you're just creating an area where kids can be up to no good. If you widen that up, especially in your form-based area where you've got, you know, pretty routine separation of streets, the wider you are, your chances of having eyes on is going to be a lot better. I think I've been contemplating ways to reduce this, and I'm thinking maybe it's based on fencing material. Like if you can see right through it, maybe there's no need for 30 feet wide. But if you've got 6-foot tall fences, a 10-foot wide corridor creates a safety issue.
There was some real concern. Commissioner Jenkins and I, we went out to Roy High School. And there were 5 connection points from neighborhoods into the high school area with a variety of pathway types. Some were narrow, some were wider, but some of the wider ones were a problem because you had accessory buildings built right up to the property line. And so when we talked to the principal, they had, when people were using those, they had a hard time. That's where some of the incidents, inappropriate instances happened because they had no way of escaping. And it created more of an alleyway type concept. And so when we started looking at all of those, that's where some of this came into play because of some of the things we ran into there. It was a very eye-opening situation because if you ever get an opportunity, go out to Roy High School and check the different varieties of, because I had no idea or went out there because we were trying to get something for our new high school out west, kind of a pathway connection. But we were concerned, they were concerned about that happening. But then when we started looking at that, we realized, yeah, there is a concern, but the wider we made it and, you know, limiting fence heights and things like that help a lot too.
So the solution is huge spotlights.
Automatic motion.
Girls' fathers.
Out in different areas. But then they said when snow comes, it can't work because the snow would cover the solar panel and it works. I mean, and but lighting is something else too. But it starts.
Yeah. So now we come back to the Valley's rural. Do we have to have? So that's quite a burden.
I mean, pathways or the width of.
It's always gonna be way patch up here.
I think it's going to change once in more the urban development, when you have those pathway connections. I know there's a few up in Jackson Hole, and it's nice to have those connection points in the urban fabric of the town. So I think there's a possible locations for them, I'm not saying that they're everywhere.
Commissioner Burton, I think maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but are you thinking this will be applied across the valley?
Well, I don't know.
Okay, the intention of this is just inside of the form-based area.
But the problem there.
This is only
Form-based zone.
Is form-based on, okay, well, that helps.
It helps, but look how big the form base is. So you got a guy way out here wants to go do something, you know, maybe he becomes a bank. You're like, well, your pathways will you want to change your house, you're gonna have to change your path.
I mean, I guess it makes sense in the form-based in the high density area. In
the low density.
Yeah, low density areas, maybe it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, what's low density? What would you? 1 acre?
I mean, even acre lots, it's not low density. I mean, is low density.
Is low density. Okay.
I feel like having the connectivity of pathways, I agree, they don't need to be as wide as you get out. Our super, like our pathway, our one pathway that we have. Quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
So
I don't know.
Yeah, you live on that
I always like skid my brake tires. I go across there, leave a little mark.
This is my pathway. You get out of it. I can't park on no path. But. So I can maybe, I'm gonna ride my bike and change my bike tire. No access. That might be something for consideration. Seriously, I don't think I lady in my driveway. This applies to my front of my house. Higher density.
Yeah, do it maybe based on.
It's a little bit tied into why I asked about a neighbor being able to jump in and say, let me jump into the form base that's going on next to me. I'm not developing anything, but it's happening next to me and I want to be able to bank. Does that make that? You also said the form base is just a multi-family development buildings. If it's, okay. He was saying, this is pretty extreme for low density areas.
Yeah.
And I was tying that into why I asked about, say, a homeowner next to Shawn Clegg's land that wants to jump in and become zoned in with the form base, even though he's not a part of the new development, but he wants to be able to bank, so he's gonna go ahead and jump into that rezone. That homeowner is not gonna be required to do this because on two reasons. Number one, it would be kind of silly. There's no pathway. It's his own personal home. But secondly, you said form base is really like this stuff is only concerning
Okay. I see.
multifamily, multi-use,
Okay.
not single family homes.
So the building design standards, the architectural design standards.
And
Not
this.
these. Just the building design standards are not applicable to single family activity. The
So the one
pathway,
acre home that wants to jump in on Shawn's thing has to do this.
not until they're ready to develop that.
Shawn developing that?
No,
Or if they get it.
the landowner.
Now, what if they're
That-
just trying to get it to build a house?
That's- But they already have a house, is what I'm saying. There are 1 acre homes right next to that 23 acres. And if I want to be able to bank, I need to be form based. So I want to just jump into a zone. I don't want to be whatever they are, 83 FR, whatever. So my little house is going to become form based so that I can become bank. My house is built. I'm not building anything. I have to do this,
Not until you decide to develop.
And if
but
you,
you're not developing.
and if you don't decide to develop because you can't, because you already have your house on that
Right.
1 acre parcel, then that won't happen.
That's not uncommon. That happens. Anytime someone starts putting in curb and gutters, anything we talked about,
With little gaps.
it's the same. You see that everywhere.
But we also have impact.
Where you may want to move and someone buys your property and they want to create more density there, then they
Yeah,
have to
so that's
comply.
right.
Yeah, then they would, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And
Okay.
so it just looks at the future down the road of how that connectivity could happen.
If you never develop, and your house stays as it is, and everybody else around you did, Shawn did, and somebody on the other side did, there's gonna be a gap in front of your house that pathway doesn't exist,
Mhm.
and we'll get community pressure by itself to use community dollars to fill in that gap, which is appropriate because you're not the reason that pathway needs to go in, because you already exist there. Everyone else using it is the reason. So community dollars, we would actually put it on our impact fee facilities plan and then just use it.
So you get the benefit of the form base, but you don't have to do this because you didn't, if I were to develop something new, take down my house, then I'm, okay.
Or you would wait until the county spent impact fee dollars to build the pathway, and then you would propose a development because there'd be nothing for you to build. Which is what some people do, like when we're going to expand roads, people, they wait until the county writes them a check for the right of way, and then they propose their subdivision, because if they propose their subdivision first, we would say, we're not paying for that, we're gonna take it
Right.
through this process. Okay. Let me ask you, on the screen, the development that you see, what is that, Staples subdivision here?
About 30 minutes true.
It's 1 unit to the acre. Oh, goodness, thank you.
Yeah, we still
have.
Yeah, these Staples, I think, was the
Oh.
original developer. That's 1 unit to the acre. Should there be pathways in this kind of development?
Where are you?
Sorry, this, junior high school is right across the street
Okay.
here. So that church is right there. The market is down here.
So my opinion, connectivity, walkability is, we lack it in a lot of places, Park Cities terrible at this, and I know we don't want to be Park City, but I'm just walkability for kids, traffic, that's my opinion, is I think wellness, right, and where we're getting is you need to be able to move by foot more. And if you don't have sidewalk, you have snow, look at us now, that's my opinion, but you guys have been longer, so. What are your thoughts on this? Would say yes. Nobody's ever walking. Nobody's walking.
That's right.
It's gonna be all pile the trail in front of your house.
Snowshoes. There's some people in Nordic.
Snowshoes.
I see people walking in Burton.
Yeah.
That's my garage, all of it, and there's a giant pile. And the county snowplow comes along and goes.
That's true. In our form-based, street regulating plans, we do have a estate lot residential, which is the 3 acre minimum, and maybe we say the pathways, this pathway standard running between lots. That's the next stage over. Commissioner Walker, yeah, isn't applicable in the estate lot residential areas.
See, this is 1 acre. We have the Thanksgiving fun run thing over here. Streets full of time, no traffic on. So why create a monster here?
Yeah.
It's, you got the walkability in.
Yeah, certainly happy to change it for the 1 acre lots if you guys want to. I hear both sides.
I think mine just look at traffic, if there's not these are all kind of like dead end, traffic's likely just people who are living there, but I think if you have areas that are thoroughfares, maybe it makes more sense.
It's hard to see on these maps here, but there is white dashed lines. Nordic is a little bit clearer that do represent pathways. And so if you see them running through an area, that's where you would see them running between lots.
So would these be 30-foot wide pathways?
Potentially.
I think the right of way is 30 feet, the pathway is only 10. You're still taking 30 feet. I agree.
Wider than the street.
And would it be more comfortable if we did put a standard in there that said if the fences are lower than 4 feet or see-through, then we can go down to 1 foot wide right away with a 10 foot wide pathway. Will be okay with that?
Well, see, you got 2 things going here. You want low fences so everybody can see into the pathway.
And now we can see the
But
back.
now there's all the traffic looking into people's private backyard.
Right. That's right.
And houses that are right there.
Right.
So that's not a good thing.
Right. It's a damned if you don't, damned if you do.
Well, and they're garbage collectors.
Yeah.
How do you handle sidewalks? Or wouldn't you apply this somewhat more like a sidewalk?
So it's a sidewalk running across street frontage, you can't build a fence taller than 4 feet on your street frontage. So that's how we address
That's
this.
in Weaver County or?
Just unincorporated area.
Where are fences? I guess I we shouldn't see fences that much.
Yeah, you don't see them that much, but if you did a solid fence in your front yard, you couldn't go taller than 4 feet. All the back, even on down your side lot lines, for the entire setback, front setback, so in most cases that's 30 feet, then you could bump up to 6 feet tall, solid all the way. Let me come up with some ideas on ability to keep eyes on the path without intrusion and maybe giving like some options.
And maybe that Nordic thing you showed us, all these people walking around here. It makes sense to shoot up 30 feet wide. Another one, good question.
Yeah, if the developer can show trail system goes in the middle and not on the right of way, that could work too, right? As long as there's connectivity, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If they have connectivity, maybe they don't need to put it in the right of way.
Yeah.
Work from the parking lot to the ski, they'll work down to the commercial stuff.
Okay, well, that's what I have for you guys. I'll make some adjustments. Next time we'll go to a public hearing, and I want to just apologize in front of everybody to Bill for not giving him the time to talk about his item. Thank you. Good discussion.
Okay. And,
Sorry.
just on Bill's behalf, I'm gonna make a selection. 2 months, we're gonna be flooding in Eden. We're gonna be flooding everywhere up there. Just like we used to.
Yeah.
And we're gonna be sandbagging back for it.
If they can get the 10 till 26 to do the master plan, we can take this one.
We could.
We can't.
Now, yes,
Yeah.
We can't because state code requires it by at least 2025.
Isn't it 26?
25.
Oh, sorry, guys. I said 26 last time.
I think you're good for
Yeah.
Well, Bill, we can close the meeting. Do you, how much do you need? I can give you the 1 minute version or I can give you an hour version.
We want 1 minute.
Okay.
Either way.
Give us the 1 hour.
Um,
I don't see anything. You did send it.
I sent, it looks like this.
Oh, yeah.
At the very end of the packet, the memo on the very end. Oh,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
Let's finish.
I'm sorry, I
Waiting for
don't
this
know.
conversation to.
He's giving us the 1 minute.
Just being polite. You guys will finish up.
Sorry.
Is there something else?
No,
What
I'm
happened?
just. So I sent you a memo. It's got a 20-ish minute video attached to it, linked, and then there's a link to a 70-page document. I'm just gonna go ahead and assume that you guys haven't had a chance to look at either of those. So if you would please look at those ahead of our next meeting. It's the 1 minute version.
Yeah, and I will resend that to everyone
Thank you.
to make sure you have that.
Brief overview of what this is.
So state code was changed this last year. In addition to the moderate income housing, there was another bill that went through Senate Bill 110 that requires the adoption of a water element to our general funds.
Gotta tie water to land use so that we actually can see the relationship between the two and we're not over allocating.
Make sure we get the dates, as you said, the camel and the pen.
Yep, Camels knows in 10.
Okay, any other questions?
Thanks for dinner.
Thank you. All right, guys. Thank you. Bill, thank you.
Great, 1 minute.
Real mad.
That's 1 minute.